Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program will begin now. Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg's Tom Giles.
Greetings, everybody. Welcome back from lunch. Hope you had a good one, and I hope you had a chance to network with your colleagues and counterparts. If you didn't, you'll have another opportunity after the presentation. I have a few housekeeping items for you. For those of you who are attending virtually, welcome back. If you have any issues with the video or the audio quality, and I hope you aren't, I apologize. And I have a really high-tech solution. Please refresh your browser. Failing that, there should be a chat box in the bottom right corner of your screen, and you can use that for support. For those of you here live, by way of reminder, there should be Wi-Fi information on your badges, on the tabletops, or right here on the screen from time to time. If you want to ask questions during the sessions, take out your phone, scan the QR code, and that's where you can write questions for our speakers. Now, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Aicha Evans, CEO of Zoox. Welcome. So before I want to kick off my conversation with Aicha by sharing a confession with you. So go back to 2017 when Intel bought Mobileye for $15 billion. At that moment, I was so convinced that autonomous driving was going to take off and rule the world that I shared privately with people. It was private. That I was convinced that neither of my kids my youngest kid would never have to get a driver's license, given the proliferation of Uber and given the imminent revolution in autonomous driving. Well, I was wrong. My kid is off to college and has their driver's license. So I got caught up in the hype. I was naive. I fully admit that. I would love to hear from you, what role do you believe the industry played and continues to play possibly in helping to generate that hype? I shared mine privately, but there are maybe counterparts of yours who've helped to publicly generate a sense of that this is inevitable and that it's coming soon. Does the industry share some of that responsibility?
This is the part where he gets to do privately and I get to do it in public, yeah? I got it.
I just bared my soul publicly.
I have a slightly different viewpoint on this. I think we have a tendency to want to label things instead of looking at history and looking at how things happen. You have to have irrational belief, exuberance, to go after something this worthy, this transformative, and this impactful on society. So you want the people who are starting to be naive, and I don't mean that as an insult, I actually mean that as an intellectual compliment, and to think it's going to happen tomorrow morning. Then you get all of the effort, all of the energy, and you get probably too many people even going after the problem or the opportunity. Then things settle down and we normalize. And then a few companies are left, and because it's worthy, we do the work, and eventually the normal rules around execution, around points on the boards, around building a business take hold. And I think that's the phase we're in right now. But the three things that are super important, we know the demand is there. It's being served today, though differently. We know that it will enable amazing things for society, whether it's from a safety standpoint, from a climate standpoint, productivity, and we know it's going to be happening. So that's what's really important. But the normal beginning exuberance is required.
Do you need to change the way you talk about this, the way you set expectations, and how do you balance that with the need to continue to generate excitement around it? It's important to generate excitement among the public, and you have CEOs to serve at Amazon as well.
I was wondering how long it would take before we got to Amazon. Anyways, look, I think we've been fairly balanced, and I think I don't think we need to be, we're a lot more realistic. We've done enough testing, seen enough pilots to know what it's going to take to solve this problem. And so I think we need to be optimistic. I think we need to show progress. There's a lot of progress, specifically in this city. You don't have to go far to see the progress. And my fellow travelers are doing actually a great job on that front. So are we. So I don't think we need to talk our way into things. We just need to, show and tell and keep scaling, keep expanding, and that's all it's going to take. The rest will come.
I want to come back to some of the technological questions in a minute, but I also want to talk about some of the ways that we have thought traditionally about autonomous driving. There is a perception that has been perpetrated by the industry, I would say, including possibly some of us in the media, that machines are smarter or better at driving. But when you think about, and that people make dumb choices, and let's face it, a lot of them do. But when you look at it on a miles-driven basis, people are actually a lot safer than that rhetoric would suggest. And it's really hard, and we talk about how, well, robot drivers are actually better than humans. I'm not sure that that's fair when you look at it on a miles-driven basis. Mm-hmm. And so do we kind of need to fess up to the idea that maybe humans aren't as bad and machines are maybe more flawed than we're giving them credit for, or it's too early to make those comparisons? Again,
I think, first of all, on this one I'll speak for myself, not for the industry. Out of the gate, I've been very clear. Close to 45,000 fatalities in the United States due to car crashes. And the majority of them are due to somebody essentially doing something dumb. That is not acceptable. I hope we never live in a world where we think that losing 45,000 Americans when it's totally avoidable is okay. Computers are extremely good at following rules, right? And by computers, I'm generalizing. The sensors, all of the software, by the way, all of the functional safety too. And given that those 45,000 fatalities come from human error, a lot of them, obviously computers will be great at that. But I have been extremely clear. When you come in from corporate America and go into this kind of space, everybody thinks she's going to be too conservative. I'm like, yeah, whatever. The reality is there's a metric we don't talk about enough, which is what you're alluding to, which is that in the United States, collectively, we drive 100 million miles per fatality. I mean, we're pretty darn good at driving. And how do we do that? First of all, by not being dumb and doing stupid things like getting drunk and driving, looking at our phones and all that stuff. But we do that because we're extremely good humans, as measured by the last 2,000 years, at dealing with sudden things, with things we haven't seen before, at adapting and making quick decisions. Computers are not as good at that yet, and it's going to take a while. And you can't just do regression against that, because it's about scenarios. It's not about number of miles. And that is why the problem is hard. That's why we're making progress. That's why we're being cautious. And along the way, it's really important for these robotaxis to be super safe. And this is why Zoox, from inception, I don't take credit for this, the two co-founders set that up. They started with the robotaxi as a business and say, if you take those two metrics, the 45,000 and the 100 million, how do you redesign and re-architect the vehicle? And it is not a car, let's not argue about that today. It is a robo-taxi. How do you react? What redundancy, what safety, what systems, what sensors, what compute? How do you put points on the board to prove your testing? How do you build a quantitative safety model? How do you look at getting stuck and how do you deal with that? How do you look at comfort metrics? Right. And that's why I think we have to be balanced. How much of your testing is done in real-world scenarios on roads versus running regressions, running the systems through a computer? We obviously do a lot of simulation. You can't solve this problem without simulation. When you're changing things, you have a new release every 2 weeks. Obviously, you have to have great simulation. And also when you want to look at the variation around all the scenarios. Now, we do a lot of testing on test tracks. We have access to a private facility that behaves sort of like public roads. And as we announced a few months ago, we're testing on public roads in California. And yeah, it's a little route, about kind of a mile or so each direction, but it's a mighty route because you've got 4 or 5 companies and towers of employees that are coming and going and driving. They have no patience for waiting or what have you. You have sort of a fire truck emergency vehicle depot, learn a lot through that. Lucky us, there's also an active construction zone. You have pedestrians, trucks, people on those uni thingies, I don't know, scooters.
Right.
So yeah, lots of scenarios. So we absolutely test on public roads in California, in Foster City, and we really focus on scenarios. That's what matters to us.
When you look at miles driven, testing miles, Cruise, Waymo, pretty far ahead. You're about 9%, if my math serves, last year. What do you need to do to change those dynamics?
I love how he asks leading questions. Like first he makes a statement in the question. I'm not conceding that I'm behind. That's not happening. No. Look, lots of respect for my fellow travelers. It's a big market, and 3 US companies making it, or 4, is a good thing. We have a different approach. We don't chase the number of miles. It's also capital intensive. You have to be very careful with how much money you deploy, because I know, in Silicon Valley, sometimes we forget, but the money chickens, they always come back to roost, so you got to make up for them at some point. And so no, we go after the number of miles we need to hit the scenarios that we need. And right now, we've been scaling at a rate that we're very happy with, and we're getting sort of very close to the optimal number of miles that we need per year for our approach.
What are the problems that are the thorniest problems that you're losing sleep over, the ones that we still need to solve for in order to prove to the public that it's safe, that I can put my aging parent in a robotaxi because I can't get in the car for whatever reason? What do we still need to solve?
So I sleep pretty well because basically I can't function if I don't sleep, and nobody wants that. But I get the essence of your question. So we can't go too fast. We really have to be responsible, and we look at these big inflection points, right, in transportation, for example, but also whether it's the virtual transportation like the internet. I was in wireless for a long time. It's not that long ago that we saw the first sort of GPRS text go through on an LCD screen. We were like, wow, but we wanted the world of today, and we had to get our way there. So we can't scale too fast. We cannot compromise on safety, any of us, because that will hurt all of us. Now, in terms of technology, I will say it doesn't keep me up at night yet. It will someday, I think, but we're starting to work on it. Snow is complicated. The vehicle dynamics are manageable. I mean, we're testing on snow as we, fairly well.
In a real world?
No, not in the real world,
okay.
On test track. But the vehicle dynamics, basically, that's where you test them first. The issue with snow is that the way the stack is built today, from a perception, prediction, and then planning and eventually control of the vehicle, that really depends on the world around you. That's why we're geofenced. Right. And that also depends on testing you've already done in either those scenarios or similar scenarios. Right. And when it snows, depending on how things were snowplowed, depending on what the city does with the snow and how it does it, you're basically facing a world change. And one that's very dynamic and very unpredictable. And back to the 100 million miles, we don't like dynamic and unpredictable.
Teeing up, we took a survey, if you could call it up for one of my future questions. On that question of snow, where should you be testing? And where do you want to be testing in order to, because you're not going to get that in Foster City anytime soon. And Vegas, right? You're in Vegas as well.
Yeah, we're in Vegas too. Look, first, we have a lot of work to do. I talk to our team a lot about earning the opportunity for the next step or the next phase. We certainly have a lot of work to do in what I call the Sun Belt, where the weather's nice, where there's a business, because there are dense cities. San Francisco is one, but there are many, many other cities. Because we just can't wait to solve snow to get out there. So what this means is that cities that have a lot of snow, as measured by number of days per year, will come later from a deployment standpoint. And as far as where we need to be testing for that, I think you know the cities where it snows in the United States as well as I do.
Where would you like to be? Where would you, I mean,
the prize is New York City.
Okay.
That's the prize.
Okay.
But buyer beware. We have a lot of work before we can all drive there.
What needs to be done in order for you to be able to start testing some of your robo-taxis there?
We have to be successful in the cities that we have already declared we're going to be in, like San Francisco and Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Accumulate a lot of data. In parallel, do a lot of testing. Apply some of the latest techniques. See what we can do around snow to accelerate. See a way of simulating, and then we'll go there. But one of the things, this is a journey. We'll just get there over time.
You've had some pretty big milestones recently, including in February, getting the permissions, et cetera. What is the most important thing you've learned once you've been able to kind of get your machines right into the real world? And two, how has that brought you how much closer to commercialization has that brought you?
We're getting quite close. We would not have started the journey on public roads unless we were. I mean, I don't have a special date or anything like that because that would be inappropriate, but we're getting quite close. We're getting a lot of feedback. Nothing better than your employees writing. You know, they have a lot of opinions. This is Silicon Valley engineers, right? They think they're all UX designers, so we're learning a lot. We're learning a lot about the service. I would say the most important thing is the operational aspect of it, right? We have a purpose-built vehicle that is built specifically and only for this, so we're learning from that standpoint. As far as the actual launch, it will come when we meet all of the metrics that we have set for ourselves, and they're making good progress.
A show of hands, you probably saw the survey. They took it away, but maybe the question wasn't asked the right way, but maybe you could just, if you've had if you've been a passenger in a self-driving car and know the Tesla self-driving, that doesn't count. Raise your hand if you've been a passenger in a Cruise or a. Okay, so it's still pretty small. In order for you to, right now you're only passengers, Zoox employees. In order to kind of widen that, I'm not talking about commercialization, but like just getting the general public, what needs to happen for that?
So there are stages. The first thing to be allowed on public, well, first you have to have a vehicle that's street legal, right? FMVSS applies to everyone. Then you have to have your state driver's license, I call it, right? Then, at least in the state of California, it starts to differ from there. In the state of California, then you have a series of permits from the CPUC. One is for external folks without charging them, and then the last stage is for external folks and charging them a fare. And so we're in the middle of that stage of application.
We recently tallied up the number of projects that Andy Jassy is eliminating that were begun under his predecessor. What's his name?
Jeff Bezos.
Can you tell me, give me a sense of kind of what the conversation is like with senior management at Amazon about the kinds of things that they need to see in order to demonstrate the viability, the commercial viability of your business? Because clearly they're taking a much closer look at expenses right now. What does that conversation sound like right now?
Look, I mean, we're super grateful for Amazon. They've been a great parent. It's nice not to be tin cupping every night for a lot of capital. They ask really good questions. We have a plan. What they expect from us is that we execute to what we said we were going to execute to, and we're putting points on the board and generally meeting our milestones, and then getting to commercialization. When we say we're going to do, that would be a pilot and an entry, and from there scale and iterate. So I get asked this question a lot. I promise you it's pretty normal, boring conversations with good questions, good what about this, what about that, how is it going, and that's it.
You're still using the six-page
I
memos?
love the six-pager.
Yeah. How often are you having to resubmit?
Well, you don't write one and then it's forever. That's not the way it works. For every meeting, you write one. And so every time we meet them, we have one. We've started using it inside of Zoox too. Not like mandatory, but it's very sobering way. First of all, the meeting is very organized because that's kind of weird, but you come in and the first thing you do is you read the document. So there's no, I wasn't there, I didn't hear it, I didn't read it, I didn't prepare, I wasn't at the scene of the crime, none of that happens. Because you read, everybody reads the same doc. Then you ask macro questions, like sort of the overall or overarching point of the doc, and then you go page by page, and everybody gets a turn and asks a question. And then if there are decisions or action items, they are recorded, and then you move on. So we write one every time we have a meeting. And at Zoox, we use them for big, hairy, complex topics, where it's really important to look at all point of views and to look at all upstream, downstream, sideways, to get dissenting views. And yeah, I love the 6-pager.
What is Zoox's valuation right now, and how does it compare with what it was when Amazon made the acquisition?
So, well, it's higher than when Amazon made the acquisition, thank God.
That's good news.
That's very good news, I think so too.
How much higher?
Well, it's higher. One of the things, though, that we're not very, we want to get to market. Look, the business exists, right? Customers want it. We believe there's TAM expansion possible. I still think about, my daughter is 17. I'm like, well, I don't know about this mode of transportation versus that mode of transportation. You have a lot of teenagers, you have busy areas, you have people who need, meaning of more senior people. So the market is there. It's really about hush, say what you're going to do what you're going to say, execute, get to market. And if you provide value and you're safe and you're responsible, the opportunities are boundless.
What is going to be most surprising to me when I have you on stage in 5 years?
I think when it comes to Zoox, how thoughtful we were in preparing to get to market, so that once we get to market, the ability to iterate and the ability to gain and maintain customer trust is really high.
You think you'll be to market by then?
Well, 5 years, come on now. I don't have all night, yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Aicha Evans, CEO of Zoox.
Please welcome to the stage Director of Research at Distributed AI Research Institute, Dr. Alex Hanna, Credo AI founder and CEO, Navrina Singh, and Signal Foundation President, Meredith Whittaker, with Bloomberg's Sarah Fryer.
So backstage, one of the first things that happened is Alex tells me I have some lettuce in my teeth. I feel like you need to be that kind of person to do what these women are doing, which is telling us all, like, as much as we think about the promise of AI technology, as much as we want to believe in the growth story here, there's got to be a moment for a reality check. And actually have a conversation grounded in what's happening now about what we can do. So thank you, and thank all of you for being here. I'm really excited to talk about this. First, I think we need to start with the definition of what we're talking about. Are we talking about humanity extinction? Are we talking about sentience? Are we talking about what's happening today? We would start with Meredith. What do we mean when we say AI ethics?
Well, I doubt there's one single definition among most of the VCs here, right? AI is a floating signifier that has been applied to wildly divergent technological methods over its over 70-year history. And in the early 2010s, some people realized that techniques dating from the late 1980s could do new things when they were accompanied by massive amounts of surveillance data and massive amounts of compute. So AI is a derivative of the surveillance business model that was established and sort of entrenched by these large tech companies. It is not a set of novel technological innovations. It cannot be conflated with scientific progress. And in fact, many of the products and techniques described as AI are heterogeneous. They're not coming from the same technological methods. So we're talking about a marketing term, not a technological term of art that is working to cede incredible power to the handful of companies that have the infrastructures to develop and deploy these systems.
So the privacy issue. We've got the privacy issue there. We've got the concentration of power issue. Navrina, what would you add to that list?
Oh, there's a lot. So I agree with Meredith. I think first we need to align on AI is not one thing. And unfortunately, it's being positioned as this one big, massive thing. But I think the way we see at Credo AI, which is an AI governance software platform, is that there is a spectrum of risk. Right now, I think there's a lot that we can be doing in fairness. We can be doing a lot in robustness, security of these systems, rather than just focusing on what is, sentience and Skynet scenarios. So, and I think that is a little bit of distraction that's happening in the market. But right now, there's already a lot of AI risk that the companies need to be solving right now, right here.
Yeah, and building on that, we've seen a few things, and this has been mentioned here at this conference, the Future of Life letter, the 22 open tweet that many people, not an open letter, an open tweet that people sign on to.
Who has time to write?
Yeah, I know, right. And so basically focusing on something that is existential risk or a superintelligence that's going to take over is really a distraction, as Navita said, that basically we have so much to see. Right now, there are people in the African diaspora who cannot see, who are getting harassed, who are getting death threats for what they're in on social media platforms. Right now, there's massive amounts of disinformation being perpetuated on the platform, preventing people from getting accurate information around disease and health. Right now, there are disparities in the allocation of healthcare and social services to communities of color. We don't really need to look far in the future into superintelligence to really see the risks of AI. When I hear superintelligence or existential risk, what I really hear is this is going to be a future problem to white people and rich people, and what we have now are problems that are leveraged to people of color, disabled people, queer people, and that's okay. And we're gonna just roll with that and future on these things that don't exist yet.
How do you see AI exacerbating inequality, and is there something we can do about it now, in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, we were already seeing this in multiple different places. Ziad Obermeyer published a study multiple years ago showing that healthcare allocation by a popular algorithm, the one algorithm they looked at found that they were training models on healthcare expenditure, and it was disproportionately not allocating care to Black Americans. And they went ahead and published that report, but that was only one algorithm used in multiple different medical systems. We've seen it in the way that facial analysis and facial recognition systems by pioneering work by Joy Buolamwini and Timit Jabru don't work well on women of color. We've seen it in terms of the way that welfare allocation is given in communities of color and poor people, and how these tools are being used to supercharge discrimination against communities of color and poor people, especially in the child welfare system. So we need tools to enable us to see what's happening in these systems, and that means looking at these very narrow uses of AI and the way they're discriminating against vulnerable populations.
How do you go about convincing people to rally around these issues? And maybe you have different issues in mind than Alex, but when you are talking to people who are so caught up in the arms race, honestly, for AI development, like, how do you get them to listen to, like, we need to keep this in mind, like, we need to make sure that we are built, while we still have control of these tools, that we're inserting some control?
Well, I mean, look, there are a handful of companies that do have control over these tools. There's no mystery about where that control comes from, and there's no escape velocity in which these tools just populate like pollen into the ecosystem and act on their own, full stop. I want to come back to sort of Alex's point, because I think Alex gave a number of great examples of how these models themselves can perpetuate bias as a product of the way that they're built, their frameworks, their training data, and how they operate, their internal logics. But that's obviously not the only way, right? These models can perpetuate, histories of marginalization and inequality due to who gets to use them, who gets to decide how they're used, and who they're used on. So, when you ask kind of, how do we rally people to this cause? How do we get them to pay attention? I think we're, in this room, this is a very narrow context, right? This is sort of the tech world, tech journalists, VCs. This is not the world, right? This is a very specific community. But, look down to LA, and you have people rallying around this. You have the Writers Guild of America who are on strike right now saying, hell no, we're not going to allow the studios to introduce GPT in a way that would undercut our standard of living, justify their firing us, then hiring us back as AI editors with, oh wait, it's an Uberization, so no contract, no benefits, no security. So people are rallying, and they're rallying hard, but we're not usually interpreting that as a rejection of these forces of inequality and consolidation of power. So I think we need to, when we talk to, say, Sam about the future of work, we need to be really specific, right? Whose job, which work? Are you in favor of Microsoft licensing the GPT technology to large studios to undercut writers' jobs or not? Let's be precise.
If I agree with Meredith, and I think the context here is pretty narrow. I do want to talk a little bit about incentive misalignment. I don't think you can just bring someone to the table and expect them to listen. I think you really have to sort of speak their language. So as an example, what we are seeing in the enterprise world, be it the big tech or some of the fast-rising AI startups, I think their incentives are literally human incentives. We are either motivated by ambition or we are driven by fear. And so what we are seeing is, even though there are these important consequences, as Alex and Meredith mentioned, there needs to be a translation to business objectives as well. And so what we are seeing right now, especially in the regulatory side, is one, fear-based motivations. That is, I need to be compliant to whatever regulations come up. I need to make sure what does good look like for my company is well-defined. And we've heard narratives today where there's been discussions around ethics is important, but I don't know what that means for my organization, which I think is a little bit of a cop-out, because if you put in the intention, you can actually figure out what does good look like for my company, for my context, for my applications. And then the second side is the ambition. And this is where we are seeing actually a lot of AI-first, ethics-forward companies where there is a big focus on using trust, using this narrative and the problem sets we are seeing in the consumer space as a competitive advantage.
What is the business reason to invest in ethics throughout an organization? Like, when you talk to clients, like, how do you get them to understand, it's not just about being sued or running afoul of laws. Like, how do you make them realize, like, this is something, because there aren't a lot of regulations yet. There aren't a lot of laws that take into account the current reality.
Yeah, great question. So, at Credo AI, our mission is to make sure AI is in service of humanity, but it also needs to translate to business objectives. So what we are seeing is companies who are very transparent around how they've built these systems, where they will use these systems, where they will not use these systems, are actually seeing accelerated sales cycles. They're seeing more trust with the customers and consumers because there's a level of transparency being built, and then we are seeing shorter procurement cycles as well. So, I think ethics is such a critical component of making sure that the discriminations and the inequalities we are seeing in society and economy is not only tackled, but there's a business incentive, to really make sure it's good business and good governance aligned.
I want to go back to the concentration of power point that you made. We have these companies that are not only running these models, but also they have the research that they're doing that maybe they're releasing, maybe they're not. They have the talent pool. Like, how do you think that if you are working in a startup now or working in the industry now, that you can reclaim some of that power from the larger companies?
I mean, I don't have a one weird trick, right? This power is concentrated infrastructure. This power is concentrated data. This power is market reach to continually renew that cycle. This power is, there's a feedback loop that constitutes in economic terms a natural monopoly. So when we're talking about the startup industry, the AI startup scene, I think most people in this room probably know more than others that these are like barnacles on the hull of big tech. These are not competitors. These are using the frameworks created by these tech companies, the PyTorches, the TensorFlows, which are basically kind of like enterprise services that are like, sprinkle some AI dust on it and get an AI out, right? But this is not a meaningful mechanism of competition. And I do worry about the framing that like business incentives well aligned with social good will solve this. Because business incentives aren't always going to be aligned with social good. And we have an article out in Wired today by Gabriel Gill and Christian Sandvig that look at a whole new industry of repurposing military surveillance AI to track and detect labor organizing among workers, right? Flip that on the head. What is the business incentive for building AI that tracks wage theft by employers? Zero. So we're not going to solve this by sprinkling some goodwill, self-regulation, and compliance mechanisms. We need to recognize that the core incentives are sort of built on a concentration of surveillance power that we actually have to check head on.
And one thing I want to add on to what Meredith is saying is that when we get into the areas of generative AI, the threat that these have, the margins that are being made as these things being a labor disciplining device, the way that these are going to cut costs and labor. But we know from recent reporting in The Verge, that there is an army of workers who are doing annotation behind the scenes to even make this stuff work to any degree. Workers from who work with Amazon Mechanical Turk, people who are work with SAMA, annotators in Venezuela, Kenya, and the US, actually all over the world. Right now, Amazon Mechanical Turk works in 190 different countries. That any kind of way...
They're doing the labeling.
That they're actually doing the labeling.
Yeah.
Whereas, Sam and Ahmed and all these other people who are going to say these things are magic, no, there's humans. And I want to have this term, and I attributed this term to a dear fellow, Nathan Kim, who calls this autonomy fetishism. So that we know that, so this is taking, maybe this is the first time we hear Marx on stage all day, but this is taking the Marxian term of commodity fetishism, burying the labor deep, 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 so we know that the exchange of commodities is not labor. This turns it on its head. These things need to appear as autonomous, and it has this veneer on this, but there is so much human labor underneath it. So where generative AI is flourishing or has this, it is because there's the threat of them possibly displacing massive amounts of labor, as Meredith mentioned, and being rehired to babysit these tools at a fraction of the rate. This is an imagination. This has happened at Google in terms of the voice assistant work. It's happening, and if it hasn't been reported yet, it will be. So that's what I see, and that's where I see generative AI, the real threat happening.
If I may respond to something, Meredith, you said that it's aligning business objectives to social good. I don't think we should all believe that's always going to happen, but I think what's really critical, and the discourse we are having here today is a testament to that all of us have different perspectives, and we are bringing that to this table to ensure that defining what good looks like for this industry is a collective effort, not dictated by a bunch of powerful companies, but at the same time not dictated by a set of activists. So the question is, how do you bring those parties together to make sure that we, for humanity, are defining what good looks like, is really important discourse.
Well, I think there are some business problems that are catching on as major concerns, right?
Absolutely.
Like if you're using Gen AI for your coding, you may end up with possible vulnerabilities in your code that are across many industries, and you could be more susceptible to hacks, right? Like that's one really obvious example. You also have issues with IP if you're using something that is scraped from, artists that didn't give their consent for their images to be used. I mean, there are some real issues, but then there's also the layer of societal consequences when you have police departments and welfare groups and local governments using AI to make decisions that affect people every day. Not saying that the hacks, et cetera, don't, but
yeah, and I think one thing, and these are great points. I mean, there is ways in which there is a business case to be made for some of these things. IP is going to be possibly one thing, but copyright goes so far. Copyright is, has famously been a very contentious issue, especially in the free software community. And it is only going to get us so far. Copyright also has to go through multiple different tests. Mehab Khan and I actually have an article called The Subjects and Stages of Dataset Development in the Ohio State Tech Law Journal, which it talks about the kind of ways in which copyright could be used to protect artists and could be a venue of legal liability. But copyright law, different kinds of security vulnerabilities are not going to protect, for instance, workers whose labor is going to be deeply casualized and Uberified by the introduction of this. Copyright is not going to protect poor families from having children snatched away from them in different places where social services are incredibly squeezed. These are going to be consumer tools, but at some point you need some intervention that is going to be on the axes of discrimination, of measures that are effectively crimes of poverty, and there needs to be intervention that is going to escape that domain.
Well, I think most people would say, obviously we don't want those things to happen, but what can we do right now? So you guys are having those conversations all the time with people who were probably asking you, is there something I can change about my business? Is there something I can change about how I'm spending my time, how I'm using these tools? What would you tell the people of this audience that they should keep in mind or adjust about the way they're using AI?
Well, I would say maybe some of the people in this audience are the users of AI, but the majority of the population is the subject of AI. They are not the people using AI. This is not a matter of individual choice. Most of the ways that AI interpolates our life, makes determinations that shape our access to resources, to opportunity, are made behind the scenes in ways we probably don't even know. So I walk into a bank, I say, get me a loan. They say, no can do. I have no idea that there's a system in back, probably powered by some Microsoft API that determined based on scraped social media I wasn't, credit worthy, right? I'm never gonna know that. There's no, mechanism for me to know this. So, I think there's a lot of ways we could change that, but the way you change that is you look at who's controlling it, who's benefiting from it, who's being harmed from it, and then you amplify the demands of those who are being harmed. So I'm not, I've been at the table for 15 years, 20 years. I've been at the table. Being at the table with no power is nothing. Flip the table. Who are we gonna listen to who's being harmed right now? Those are the writers. Those are, the workers. Those are the people who are going to be sort of, killed in an autonomous driving crash or, an autonomous submarine or whatever it is, right? Because these standards have been whittled down and because the interests of these large companies have been privileged over the interests of, larger populations.
Are you seeing within companies right now that as people who as you say, have a seat at the table, as they speak up about their ethical concerns, that the AI rush to market has been silencing them, has made it harder for them to speak out?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
There was
that's what we've seen in our reporting as well.
There was a paper published by Sana Ali and a few people last week at the FACT conference, which was specifically on this, on the organizational dynamics of ethics owners within companies. Basically, they found these people get ignored, they get sidelined, they are provisionally at a table, but then get completely ignored. Meredith and I both worked at Google, and
both don't work there anymore.
And both don't work there anymore for a reason, because there is a limited amount of power that can be given there. And there's an easy way in which labor of really well-meaning people does get co-opted to kind of give a veneer around it.
Does this transition to efficiency, like cost cutting, does that impact the voice of people who are trying to?
I mean,
it does. I mean, at Google, I know there was in terms of thinking about in large language models, some reporting, I forgot exactly, it might have been from y'all, but there was the code red on large language models as Bard was trying to catch up with ChatGPT. Any kind of standard ethics reviews, which I will tell you were very low to start with, were completely sidelined in favor of getting this stuff out the door. So any kind of attention can be done, and I want to underline what Meredith is saying, needs to be thought of at the collective level. Individual actions from individual ICs or even kind of low-level managers at firms are going to be very difficult as a means to get there. Thinking about what collective action can mean, whether that means with collectives of workers or with collectives of consumers even, something needs to change for these things to improve for the better and for the social good.
Irina, when you're working with companies, I know we've talked about this, but you feel like if there's not a person who's accountable for ethics, then no one's accountable. But that person might also have trouble speaking up. So how do companies balance that? How do people who want those jobs balance that, where they want to be able to have an impact, but they don't want to be like the person who comes in at the very end when the product's about to launch and say, hey, you can't launch that, and they're like, okay, go away, like we're launching this thing.
And I think a lot of that depends upon the leadership and the company values, to be honest. And I do agree with Alex that we've seen instance after instance in the past year of responsible AI teams being let go. So a question that we ask of the organizations we work with is, does that mean that you're distributing responsibility within your different teams? But who is accountable, right? So one of the things that on the policy side, as well as on the company side, that we've been pushing for is disclosures around investment in AI safety and governance in terms of how many people do you actually have working on this problem, because this can't be sidelined. This can't be like, oh, there's a responsible AI team, but it's embedded within all the different parts of the organization. So what we are seeing, again, unfortunately not enough, but at least in the AI-first, ethics-forward companies, is creation of specific roles who are made accountable for AI governance as well as oversight of the AI applications. But we need more action there.
Yep, I do feel like it is tough. Like when we've talked to those people who have those jobs, like they do have trouble being heard in these organizations. Any parting thoughts like that we only have a few seconds left, but as people come away from, we've heard Sam Altman, we've heard Stability AI, we've heard from all of these leaders, what can people also take away that they can change about what they're doing every day? Yeah,
I want to make one point quickly, and this is sort of to tie the issues of privacy and AI more tightly together. Like, why is the president of Signal up here talking about AI, beside the fact that I did a lot of scholarly work on it, right? Because AI is a surveillance technology. It requires surveillance in the form of these massive data sets that entrench and expand the need for more and more data, more and more intimate collection. The solution to everything is more data, more knowledge pooled in the hands of these companies. But then these systems are also deployed as surveillance devices. And I think it's really important to recognize that it doesn't matter whether an output from an AI system is developed through, sort of produced through some probabilistic statistical guesstimate, or whether it's data from a cell tower that's triangulating my location. That data becomes data about me. It doesn't need to be correct. It doesn't need to be sort of reflective of who I am or where I am, but it has power over my life that is significant, and that power is being pooled in the hands of these companies. So, when I think about these, like the Venn diagram of AI concerns and privacy concerns is a circle, and there is a world where, Signal and other legitimate privacy-preserving technologies persevere, where that becomes an increasing norm as people's discomfort with this concentration of power and surveillance increases. And there's a world where we continue on the hype-filled road toward AI, where that power is entrenched and naturalized under the guise of intelligence, and we are, surveilled to the point where we have very, very little agency over our individual and collective lives. So I think this concern is existential, and it's much bigger than the sort of AI framing that is often given.
Yeah, I think, for Credo AI and what we are focused on, we hear all these complexities of solving different kinds of risks, especially in different AI contexts. So as a solution-focused company, we are focused on really defining those guardrails for these AI systems, which are super complex, with problem sets as have already been indicated here on this panel. So, our focus right now is on making sure, one, we are taking in standards that are emerging, codifying them as guardrails, taking in regulations that are coming and codifying them as guardrails, but also informing what does good regulation and policy look like, because as was mentioned, we need all voices on that table. It can't be just either the most powerful companies or the most fastest growing companies. It really needs a collective action, and that's what we are focused on.
Alex?
We've heard a lot from the very powerful.
Today.
and today itself, this is a great example. And I'd just end by saying, listen to the people who are most affected by this. Listen to data workers, data laborers, the thousands of people who work on mechanical turk for SAMA. Listen to people whose livelihoods are being decimated, whether that's writers in Hollywood or artists who are having their works sucked up by stability and by DALL-E to take away their livelihoods, conduct auctions that completely go ahead and infringe on the exact same markets that sellers are trying to enter. Listen to the staff of the National Eating Disorder Association, whose entire staff was cut out and replaced by a chatbot who then told people to resume their disordered eating habits. Listen to these people who are at the front lines, heed them, and those are the people that need to be at the table.
Thank you all. Thank you for all of your insights.
Please welcome to the stage Rocket Lab CEO Peter Beck with Bloomberg's Ashley Vance.
Hello. Thank you, Peter, for joining us. This is sort of a victory of sorts for me already. A few years ago, I wrote a book about Elon Musk, and he didn't talk to me for a long time after I wrote the book. I've just written a book about you, and here you are, still talking to me. Maybe I was too nice.
I like it that you spent so much time with me and never figured me out at the end of it.
I tried. Maybe we will figure you out today. While I was doing this book, I researched, I spent 5 years on it, hanging out with you, a number of space startups around the world, dug into the history of the field as well. If you look over the last 20 years, there's been probably about 12 legitimate rocket startups of some kind. SpaceX is launching about every 3 days. You guys have launched dozens of rockets. You're up to about twice a week if you want to. After that, the number tails off very quickly. Some people have done 1 or 2 and then really had fits and starts. It's amazing because there's veterans of space programs at these other companies. What is it that you and SpaceX seem to have figured out that this entire rest of the industry can't seem to get?
That's a difficult question. I think in its simplest form, it's execution. We don't tend to make a big fanfare. We're kind of just fly under the radar and just keep launching rockets and execute. And I think the space industry, the great thing about the space industry is also the curse of the space industry. The great thing about a space industry is I could sit on a stage here and say, Ashley, I'm going to go to Mars, or pick an even more absurd destination, I'm going to go to Jupiter in 2030. And everybody go, yep, cool, you're going to Jupiter in 2030. No other industry can you say such absurd things and have people get so excited and rally in behind you.
Yeah.
And so that's the great thing about the space industry, because it really promotes, big dreams and big execution. But the challenge with it is that the space industry has historically been pretty shy on execution. So you can say these wonderful things and everybody doesn't laugh you out of the room, but at the end of the day, after you say those things, there's kind of to your point, there's a big gap between those things being said and execution. So.
Yeah, well, yes, and I just always keep feeling like you and SpaceX, Rocket Lab and SpaceX I mean, you could say execution. It's amazing to me to watch people who've done this before still struggle. Like on the one hand, it's rocket science. We know this is hard. On the other hand, Rocket Lab, you had a group of 20-somethings that really had never built a rocket before. You did not go to college for this. You were designing dishwashers at one point.
Remarkably similar, though.
But I mean, you guys have clearly figured something out that just got all that right, and it's still sort of a mystery to me.
Yeah, well, I think it's building the right team, setting the right vision, building the right business around it, being kind of very deliberate about how you build your company as well as building the rocket, and I'm sure there's a little bit of luck thrown in there too. But at the end of the day, I've generally found if you say to somebody, we have a motto at Rocket Lab, do what you say you're going to do. And everybody gets measured against that. And generally, if you say that I'm going to go and do something and then you actually go and do it, that builds good trust. And if you continue to do that all the way through, then you build a good company.
Since I've known you, you're an engineer at heart. You're very hands-on. You build a lot of your current workhorse, the Electron rocket, which is a bit smaller in New Zealand, where the company was started. You're now building this larger rocket called Neutron in the United States, and will launch it from the United States. You're really the only commercial rocket company that I can think of that's spread across 2 continents. You were this very hands-on guy. I mean, I'm just curious how you're adjusting and evolving as now it seems like your attention is split, you're geographically split. You probably don't get to actually wrench on things as much as you like to.
Yeah, that's a good challenge, and you can throw into that, we went and acquired 4 different companies. So, Rocket Labizing those 4 companies is a huge amount of work. But I think as long as the thesis and the rules are there and people follow the rules, and when I say the rules, I mean like the culture of the company, then you don't necessarily need to be the guy that screws that rocket engine to the back of the launch vehicle, provided the guy who is actually screwing the rocket engine to the back of the launch vehicle understands the company thesis and understands all of the cultural aspects that make sure that actually works. So no, it's definitely more challenging to spend more time on a plane than ever, but it's pretty fun because you get to, we talk a lot about rockets, but 2/3 of our business is building spacecraft.
Yeah.
So we get to touch some really, really cool stuff.
So I think about this, you know far more about this, so please correct me if I'm wrong. I just think about commercial space right now. We've got a lot of rocket companies. The cost of launch has come down. We're launching more often. We have myriad more satellite companies putting up giant constellations. It reminds me so much of like 1996, consumer internet, companies laying fiber, building data centers, making this big gamble that something incredible was going to happen on the internet. I feel like some things were obvious, that there would be businesses that would work on the internet. Most of them, it was kind of, we didn't really know where this would go. In space, the first big businesses so far have been communications satellites and imaging satellites.
Yep.
And this is like the entire premise so far of like what this is hanging on to a large degree. I'm just so curious about, do you see that as being enough for the next 10, 15 years? Do you think something else has to come along? you know, what might those things be?
Yeah. Well, I think about this a lot because, you know, there's always the promise of the industry and all the market studies that predict, you know, depending on which market study, you can pick up between $1 and $2 trillion, like a factor of error of 100% of how large the market will be in 2030. But I think some of the key factors for me that are more comforting than ever are you're seeing like real fundamental use cases from really large companies. I mean, obviously, you know, Elon's got Starlink, and that's kind of proving its worth. Amazon have got the Kuiper, which is kind of the equivalent. You've seen now, you know, Apple with their E91 service, voyage into space, and that there's enough kind of real use cases from real companies that it's kind of a little bit obvious now that is going to proliferate.
But all that stuff is really communications at its core. I mean, do you think, so for people who don't know, I mean, you know, we went from 2,500 satellites like 3 years ago in low Earth orbit to about 10,000 today. We've been on this suddenly exponential curve after it had been like this for 50 years. Huge chunk of that is communication satellites. I just always sort of think, I could see the near term, but like, does that stuff make money? And then what comes next? Otherwise, the air starts to come out of the room pretty quick.
Yeah, no, I think that's a fair call. And in the last, I would say, 10 years, you've seen a tremendous amount of venture capital flow into various space business models, and some have been pretty successful, and others, you know, not so successful. But I think with any new frontier, there is a certain amount of throwing the mud at the wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
And you know, we went through that process for a long time, and then, like I say, now you've got like Amazon building a hugely large constellation to service their customers. And yeah, you can kind of loosely characterize it as comms, but I mean, Amazon actually have a purpose. It's not just to sell internet to people. It's like it drives their business model and actually improves their business model. That's why they're doing it. So in space, often people develop cool stuff and then try and find a market for it. And I think with the version of that is happening where people actually have real business needs at scale that drive people putting infrastructure in orbit, which is what we need. And the US government is the same. You know, if you look at the SDA programs, the whole move away from one or two big geostationary assets into a totally proliferated low Earth orbit, it just changes the game.
Do you think, I mean, some people beyond communications, they talk about manufacturing. You just did a really interesting thing where you partnered with this company called Varda that's making a bioreactor, a pharmaceutical factory in orbit. That went on a SpaceX rocket. I mean, it's this fascinating thing of like 3 commercial space companies, 2 which are kind of quasi-competitors still pushing this thing forward. So that's manufacturing, this idea that you can make chemicals and molecules in space that are different from Earth. There's talk about, you know, moving data centers up into orbit and reducing pollution on Earth, just having them be solar powered. Do any of these applications jump out to you as the most likely? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sure that launching data centers into orbit is better for the environment than keeping them on the ground. But you know, in Varda's sense, it's just physics, right, and chemistry. There's a fundamental, if you're in a zero-G environment, you know, crystal proteins grow differently. And in the search for kind of new and more exotic things, that's unshackling, you know, that production process from gravity is pretty game-changing. And, you know, at the moment, it's really only been until now that you can do that as a startup at any kind of level of scale. Right. Prior to, you know, even 10 years ago, you just wouldn't do that.
$100 million just to
just to try. Yeah. Like, you know, for some tens of millions of dollars, and I know that sounds a lot of money in some senses, but for some tens of millions of dollars, you can have a crack at a really big thing.
If we could just pull up a slide for a second where we polled the audience. Before this, I found this fascinating. I'm not trying to hawk my book, but I wrote a book that's kind of the opposite of the results of this poll. I mean, to me, the most the most activity, the most money is not tourism, it's not Mars, it's in low Earth orbit where the number of satellites is increasing exponentially. Yeah, so I'm just kind of curious if you, I mean, this is in our lifetime to make the most progress. Do you, what is your take?
Firstly, I think you should send that to me. Secondly, maybe I should get working on the neutron capsule.
Yeah,
because clearly I'm missing a trick.
Yeah. But you've never been interested, as far as I know, in really human space travel.
No, I mean, I think that is just, that's a whole nother level. And I admire astronauts incredibly because, you know, I have all the knowledge, but none of the courage to ever stand on foot of a rocket. And you know, to be able to sit on a rocket and dislocate yourself from all of that risk is just, it's a special superpower to be able to do that.
What do you make of that though? That the public thinks tourism, you know, is where this is heading,
well, I think
as opposed to sort of industry and business.
It's a masterful piece of marketing from Virgin Galactic. That's what that says to me.
Yeah.
But I know, it's more seriously, I think a lot of people kind of like the idea of going to space, and human spaceflight has always been the draw card, right? I mean, it is a totally different thing to watch a rocket going up with a human on board. There's just orders of magnitude different, and that's the kind of the romance of space in a lot of sense. So it's not totally surprising that everybody wants to have their trip.
So historically, you and SpaceX have been quite different. SpaceX makes large rockets. You made a smaller rocket. SpaceX does do humans. You guys have not focused on that. You know, moving forward, you're making this rocket called Neutron that is going to compete quite directly with SpaceX's Falcon 9. At the same time, SpaceX is making a even larger rocket called Starship. You know, dealing with Elon, competing with Elon comes with its challenges. Yeah, I'm just very curious if you see SpaceX moving forward now as your most direct competitor and how you keep pace with this company that seems to have somewhat of a head start. Yeah, I mean, look, in some respects, a lot of people want to kind of play that card, but I guess we're on our own mission, our own journey, and at the end of the day, everybody focuses on the rocket like it's the exciting red stick roaring in the sky. The reality is, I'm trying to build a big, like, long-lasting, durable space company. And I think the space companies of the future are going to have their own rocket, they're going to be able to build their own satellite, and they'll have an application or a series of applications or infrastructure in orbit. And I think that's the end game here, is if you have your own rocket and you can build your own spacecraft, then you can do things in orbit that nobody else can do. So in that sense, you know, SpaceX has kind of focused in on internet from space and you know, are moving quickly to try and prove if that business model is going to be successful or not. But I think you know, ultimately there's going to be a number of those, and the companies that can go to orbit at will are the ones that are going to win. So and I know you get asked this question a lot, I'm just curious. Now, we've just seen Virgin Orbit go bankrupt recently. You bought some of their piece parts. I mean, you mentioned you think there'll be a number of these companies. You're talking about like this, you know, historically we've only had rocket companies, we've only had satellite companies, you've been a software. You're talking about something much bigger than that. You know, how many players are there like that? Today or in the future? No, in the future, to support, if you buy into this massive increase of satellites, to support all that. Well, I mean, hopefully there'll be two. But do you think do you think this is like a two company race, or it's more than that? Look, I think it'll be more than that, but I don't think it's going to be 10. I think it'll be relatively small, because the reality is that launching a rocket and building a rocket and going to orbit is just an assault on physics. And it's really difficult to do. And it doesn't really matter, you know, you can have better compute and you can have AI, you can have all the rest of it. At the end of the day, it's 1.1 to 1.2 times safety factor or margin on every single thing in the vehicle. And, you know, materials, if you look at a rocket engine, the combustion efficiency of a rocket engine hasn't really changed since 1962.
we just increase the pressure, but the actual combustion efficiency hasn't changed. So we kind of maxed out on chemical propulsion and on physics and on materials and a long time ago. So most of the stuff you see is kind of tweaks around the edges, or in kind of Elon's scale is you just build bigger and bigger rockets. So I think it's fundamentally always going to be super, super difficult to do.
Yeah, we're just keeping an eye. We're just about out of time. What is your next launch, and when is it, and what will you guys be doing?
You know what? I don't know, and I think that's the definition of success, that I don't know. No, but
you're right to some degree. It used to be this all or nothing.
Yeah, all or nothing thing.
Affair,
so I mean,
right?
I'd probably in the next. I mean, we're launching, every couple of weeks in general. So probably in the next couple of weeks there'll be another launch vehicle that's ready to go.
I don't know if he's telling me the truth that he doesn't know, or if this is an indication of how far this business has come. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Ashley. Cheers.
Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Anduril Industries founder Palmer Luckey with Bloomberg's Emily Chang.
Hello, and thank you, Palmer, for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I should say aloha.
Thank you.
I actually want the story because I'm from Hawaii originally, and I've never had the full story about the aloha shorts, and normally it's flip-flops thing.
Oh yeah, but I'm going to an airfield after this, so I need real shoes. No, the story's pretty simple. My clothes growing up were mostly my dad's hand-me-downs as soon as I was big enough to fit into them, and I went through puberty early, and that was pretty fast. And most of his hand-me-downs were Hawaiian shirts. He worked at a car dealership, my dad's car salesman, and so he basically had a lot of slacks and business dress shirts.
Yeah.
And then whenever he was not wearing those at home, he liked to wear Hawaiian shirts, and I got all the hand-me-downs. And then by the time I started Oculus, I just kept doing what I'm doing because I didn't really think about it very hard. And then by the time I tried to buy other clothes, people started giving me a hard time about it because it turns out that your job as a founder is partly to actually do real work, but then the other is you have to be a figurehead of sorts. And I realized that I had inadvertently created brand value in consistently wearing the same thing. And so to this day, my closet is about 70 Hawaiian shirts and then a few other shirts for business purposes.
All right, well, you're not allowed to ever wear anything else, okay?
Well, I wear suits for Washington, D.C., funerals, and weddings. So.
All right, good to know. Now, behind the aloha vibe, a lot of people think of you as the guy who's building the virtual border wall, which either makes them love you or hate you. Let's talk about Anduril's main mission and the products that you're actually building to achieve that, because it's bigger than that.
Well, it's way bigger than that. And I will say, I actually don't think that many people think of us that way. I mean, people like to focus on the border work because it's politically controversial. The reality is that we've actually done way more on that in this administration than the past one. So people try to tie that to being a Trump thing. The reality is everyone agrees that we need to know what's coming across the US border. There are people who disagree on immigration policy, but immigration policy is separate from awareness of what's coming across the border. And Anduril makes technology that we use to track drug trafficking, human trafficking, arms and cash smuggling in both directions going across the border. Even the people who want open immigration, unlimited immigration, you can walk into the United States and instantly become a citizen. There's nobody outside of a really radical fringe that thinks that the right way to accomplish that is to allow the cartels to operate unimpeded. And so if people say it's controversial, I would say the people who say it's controversial are people who have an interest in making it appear controversial. There's actually very few people who agree with them on that. But the main thing that we do is we're a defense product company. So Anduril is trying to be the world's next major defense contractor. Our primary product is a piece of AI software called Lattice. It powers all of our hardware systems. It ties together hundreds of systems that are made by other companies, taking data from every sensor so that it can be a sensor for every person and for every weapon and for every effector of every other kind. And our goal is that you have the best information possible when you're in any type of situation where lives are on the line. You want to know where all the good guys are, you want to know where all the bad guys are, and you want to be extremely certain as to which is which and what the best way to respond is. And we built a lot of hardware products on top of Lattice, but we have a lot more people working on software than hardware. So despite the appearance of a hardware company, and I'm a hardware guy, at the end of the day, most of what we do is driven by software.
So let's talk about, you raised more money than almost any other startup last year, there's been this flood of VC capital into defense tech, and I know you've said, we're making defense sexy again. Founders Fund was one of your earliest investors, Anduril now, we've seen Sequoia getting into defense tech. Why is this happening now? Did it take a war?
Because everyone is finally opening their eyes. When we started Anduril, we struggled to raise any money. And this was a guy who's just sold his last company for billions of dollars. So that wasn't the issue. But the responses we were met with from investors were somewhere kind of a mix between indifference and scorn. So on the indifference side, people saying, well, we live at the end of history. There's not going to be any more conflict. Economic entanglement precludes any kind of large-scale warfare in the future. And so what you're doing is just a waste of time. And so I don't care about it. The other side is people saying, any use of force is wrong and what you're doing is evil, and so I won't be involved. And I think that the reason that you've seen things shift over the last few years has been a recognition that we don't live at the end of history. There are still people in the world who want to use large-scale violence to achieve their aims. There are, unfortunately, countries that have a reasonable position that that is the only way that they are going to be able to continue to expand and to grow per their aims. There was a lot of belief years ago that China was going to westernize, that they were going to adopt more of the principles of the West, and that they were going to be a good partner going into the future. And I think that was tied to so many tech companies making the bet that they would be allowed into China, that they would be able to make that into a market for them. Today, the equation has shifted. I think a lot of the attitude shift has been driven maybe by something a little more cynical than realizing that war is possible, as Russia has shown. It's driven by the fact that VCs realize they're not going to be able to make money in China, and so they're getting out. You have a lot of tech companies that are realizing that China's never going to be a big market for them. They realize that they're locked out, and not only are they locked out of China, China's going to come and eat their lunch. And so there's this newfound wave of patriotism, of dubious source, but I'll take what I can get.
We're going to come back to China in a moment, but first I do want to talk about the politics, because so much has been made of Peter Thiel's investment in Anduril, Peter Thiel's connection to Trump. Is this a partisan effort, or are you trying to cross the aisle with this technology?
I mean, the National Defense Authorization Act is the only bill that's passed every single year since it started being created. It's about as bipartisan as it gets. There's very few people who think that it's better for China to have better weapons than the United States, that it's better for Russia to have better weapons than our European allies. It is really a quite bipartisan issue. And I will note, I don't want to be too mean, but one of the reasons that people have tried to turn me into a partisan figure is because it's really good for clicks. The reality is I spend maybe, 1% of my time on politics. I spend 99% on tech, but that is not what people want to focus on. And a lot of it's also not true. I mean, heck, one of the moderators on your previous panels was on TV spreading all kinds of lies about me during the election year. She was saying that I was funding fake news and paying people to spread it. She was on TV saying that I was funding alt-right memes and teams of people to spread on the internet, and said the real reason I was fired from Oculus is because I wasn't even involved in the day-to-day of my business anymore. I mean, just like an ideological hit squad on me, spreading, hang on, let me finish.
Well, we'll have to let her check that, but I will let you finish.
Nobody disagrees on these things. It's not a matter of opinion. It was just a fabricated story that outlets, including Bloomberg, picked up, ran with, and performed a character assassination on me, and have tried to turn me into a political figure because that's what they want to do to me. People who spend far more on politics on the other side of the aisle would never even be asked the question you're asking me. Would you ever have Zuckerberg up here and say, hey, you donated a lot of money to politics. I mean, you're a pretty political figure. I mean, isn't your company actually really partisan? Yeah. You wouldn't even dream of doing it. The reality is, it's because it's okay to attack one side for being political and not the other that the question is even being asked. And I understand that you have to bring it up because that's unfortunately the hell I live in. But it's something that I'm still going to get frustrated with.
I might ask Zuckerberg that question. I might. But you made your point. So there's a lot of controversy about tech companies working with the US government. We've seen employees protesting at Google.
Sure.
For work with the Pentagon, protesting at Microsoft, for work with ICE. You have really strong opinions about this.
Yep.
You think Silicon Valley should be working with the US government?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that we live in a really dangerous time, and I have thought this for years. This is not a new opinion that I've developed in the wake of the Ukraine war. All of a sudden, I'd found a conscience. I've been saying this consistently for a long time, since before I even started Anduril. We live in the first period in US history where our best, most innovative tech companies with the largest pools of talent in our country refuse to work with the military. We've never been in a situation like that before, and people don't understand how dangerous that is when you think about the global competition, not just militarily, but economically, and what that means. Imagine if during the World War II buildup, if our biggest tech powerhouses like Westinghouse or RCA or General Electric had said, you know what, I'm not sure that we really should be taking sides. I don't want my tech to be used for military purposes. I think that Imperial Japan is a huge revenue opportunity for our shareholders, and I really think we need to not take sides in this. I mean, that is the situation we're in today, where tech investors and tech companies are refusing to work with the DoD, not because of any ethical qualms. I think that's a smokescreen. It's primarily been driven by a desire to work with our largest strategic adversary and make a lot of money doing it. But these Google employees, for example, signing this open letter saying that they don't want Google to work with the DoD, they made a great smokescreen. You know, they can't go out and say, we're going to refuse to work with the military because we are sellouts to China. But what they can say is, oh, we're just listening to our employees. Well, I mean, let's look at the numbers. You had 3,000 people signing that open letter. That represents, I think, just under 2% of the Google workforce. Now, does that mean that 98% of Google employees want their tech used for the military? No, not necessarily, but it means that 98% didn't care enough to click a one-click survey that were already logged in with their employee credentials on. I mean, like, I think it's a tiny radical minority that was very loud about this. And I think that if we are going to persist and if we are going to protect our allies, we cannot afford to have our most innovative companies divorced from the organizations that are responsible for keeping those companies viable.
Do you do work with other countries?
Oh,
just the U.S.?
No, tons of work with the other countries. We do a lot of work with the United Kingdom. We've done a lot of work with Australia. I mean, at the end of the day, and in case your follow-up question is, you know, which countries would you work with, not work with? At the end of the day, that's determined by U.S. policy. And you know, if the United States wants us to work with the UK, which is a strong strategic partner, then we're going to work with them. If they tell us to work with an ally like Australia, then we're going to work with them. I get people sometimes asking me, oh, but would you what's your line in the sand? Would you sell to North Korea? Would you sell to China? And the answer is, doesn't matter. I'd go to prison if I did that. I don't even have to think about it. And I do actually have opinions on it, but the right thing for me to do as a guy who is working really at the behest of democratically elected leaders is not for me to say that I'm the guy who decides who gets our technology or how it gets used. That should be decided not by corporate executives, but by elected officials who are actually beholden to power.
We did do a poll about China from our audience, where they think the biggest tech threat in China is. Looks like AI and chip making, pretty tied up there. Companies like Apple, companies like Google, companies like Tesla have deep ties to China. Are these ties appropriate?
I don't know if I would say appropriate so much as existentially crippling.
That's another way to say it.
Well, look, let's talk about a really big problem that's an elephant in the room that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. The analysts, the financial weenies, they look at these companies and they try to come up with what the risks are. Oh man, are rising interest rates going to hurt their sales? Could it be that they're not able to capitalize this plant that's over here? But people don't like to talk about the real risk, the existential risk. The risk where Taiwan is taken by China and they either fully deprive us of advanced capabilities that we would certainly deprive them of in any kind of wartime scenario, or alternatively, that they unilaterally act to cripple our largest companies. Think how much trouble Apple would be in if China decided they wanted Apple to be in trouble. Almost all their manufacturing is there. They cannot exist as a company without that. You have a nearly $3 trillion company, the biggest powerhouse of economic value in the entire United States, totally beholden to the whims of one person in China. That's crazy, that's unprecedented. But people don't talk about it, including Apple, because if it happens, it's too unthinkable. It's a risk you can't even talk about. You can't even discuss this risk rationally because it's so extraordinarily bad of an outcome. And so instead, what do people do? They say, well, I think that we do actually need to stay coupled to China. Collaboration is really important, and shouldn't we all just get along? They don't have a choice. They made their choice years or decades ago, and now they have to pretend that they made the right one. Anyway, yes, I have strong opinions on this. The problem fundamentally is the right time for us to realize this danger and this risk was when we allowed China to join the World Trade Organization. We had this misguided idea that we were going to westernize them and that they were working for us. And it turns out that we're working for them. And the second best time to solve that is now.
So let's talk about TikTok then for a second, because something else you have strong opinions on. I know TikTok is banned from Anduril employees' phones. Why do you think TikTok is such a threat, and what do you think that the US government should do about it?
Well, there's a few sides here. So the United States government recently passed a piece of legislation that prohibits the installation or use of TikTok on government devices and also on the devices of government contractors. Meaning if you build weapon systems, you're not allowed to have the Chinese spyware app on your phone. Seems pretty reasonable, right? All right. And people say, oh, but they said really, really nicely that they're never going to send their information to China. Well, guess what? Chinese law begs to differ. The Chinese Communist Party is literally on the board of directors of ByteDance. They literally have a financial stake in the company. The laws of China are extremely clear. Them and their families are at risk if they dared to not do what the government said, or to even if they were even to tell anybody about it. Now people can say, Palmer, that's unfair. In the United States, you can get a court order to get information too. Yes, but you can't tell the company that they're not allowed to even talk about it and that they have to lie continuously about it. Nor are they going to imprison you and your family if you do something about it. You're probably just going to get a book deal. So, and that's the difference, you know, the book deal versus prison dichotomy between China and the United States. I actually think that the United States should have gone slightly further on this. One of the reasons that we didn't ban TikTok from our employees' personal devices earlier as a security risk is because it's actually a legal minefield. You can't really quite get away with that in modern times for good reason. I think they should have gone further and said, you know what, we are going to formally declare that TikTok and ByteDance applications, and really any application that is controlled directly by the Chinese Communist Party, is a security risk. We're not saying you have to not allow it, but you should be allowed to ban it if you want to. In other words, let's say that you're not a company that's directly covered like we are by this piece of legislation. Imagine if we are something that's adjacent, like a company that does accounting for weapons companies. They're technically not covered. I wish our government would go and say, you know what, we're formally declaring that TikTok is a security risk, and that any company that believes it is in the national interest to ban it from devices that have access to their data is not at some kind of legal risk from TikTok or their employees saying, hey, that's not fair, I really like funny videos on my lunch break.
You did sell your first company to Facebook.
I did.
You did. What do you think about what's going on over there?
Oh man, well look, you know, everybody can always speak. Everyone who sells their company always likes to come back later and say, if I were there, things would be better and things would be different. You know, I think that I think that they've not made the best moves that they could have made over the last few years.
You're being remarkably diplomatic when you weren't so diplomatic earlier.
But here's why. It's because I'm not a journalist, so I'm not. By the way, I actually was. I was a journalism major at Cal State Long Beach. I was the online editor of the Daily 49er, which is one of the largest student papers in the country. Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah. Who knew? That's why I'm so butthurt about bad journalism. But the problem is that. There are, what was I even saying?
We were talking about Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg and what he's doing right and wrong.
And what they're doing right now. I mean, the reason I'm so diplomatic is because at the end of the day, I'm still a VR guy. I want VR to succeed. And me going out there and lighting everyone on fire for every mistake they make in trying to make VR happen is not going to make virtual reality more successful. And that's what I was saying. I'm not unbiased. I'm allowed to be a VR partisan. I'm allowed to only say things that I think will cause virtual reality to become a mainstream technology faster. And in my estimation, going out and lighting the people who took my company, stabbed me in the back, and threw me out the back door, it's not going to be good for VR. So I'm not going to do it. And look, for whatever differences I might have with them, they are one of the companies that has put more into VR than anybody in the world, and I don't want them to stop doing that. They are one of the few companies in the world that truly believes in VR still.
Apple, you seem to be a fan of the new thing. Is it going to be a thing if it's $3,500?
I mean, I would say that kind of isn't the point. So for many years, I've said that virtual reality...
Is it going to be a thing anyway?
At some point, but not at $3,500. I mean, I've said for many years that the virtual reality has to become something that everybody wants before it can become something that everyone can afford. You can't reverse those two steps and expect mainstream acceptance. I wrote a blog post on my blog, PalmerLuckey.com, the #1 Palmer Luckey blog on the internet, called Free Isn't Cheap Enough. And in it, I argued that current VR technology, as it existed a couple years ago when I wrote it, was so limited that even if you gave it away for free to every American, most people would not continue to use it due to the technological limitations, ergonomic limitations, content limitations. And if that's the case, if they wouldn't use it even if it was free, then clearly cost is not the problem, and reducing cost is not what gets you to mainstream acceptance. Apple is taking the other approach. They are spending an enormous amount of money to drag what should exist a few years in the future and drag it into the present. And it's very expensive to do engineering that way. What they are doing is seeing if they can make it something everybody wants. If they can make it something everybody wants, then it will certainly be something that everybody will buy once it's $1,000. And there's nothing that they're doing that is fundamentally expensive. Everything they're doing can easily be costed down using conventional manufacturing techniques in the future. And I think that that's where that's going.
All right, we have a question from the audience.
All right.
Not a journalist, from the audience. So I'm going to let you take a swing at it. How do you reconcile the idea of having a full-blown surveillance regime and individual liberty?
Well, I am a libertarian, and I'm not a fan of full-blown surveillance regime. I would say that's also not what we're building. I mean, you'll note we're not building tools that are used to surveil masses of American civilians. We're not hoovering up their personal data. We're not hoovering up stuff and marketing to them. Like, I don't fall into that. People say, oh, but you're a surveillance company. You make these sensors that detect vehicles, animals, drones, et cetera. To which I say, you know what? There are certain places where you do need surveillance. If you have a military base that is constantly under threat of attack, you need surveillance, and I don't feel bad about that. If you have a border where there are people who are coming into the United States and selling us massive quantities of fentanyl-contaminated marijuana, if they're coming in here and selling people into sex slavery, I don't really mind watching that one little strip and saying, you know what, people who go from that side to this side or this side to that side, and they're doing it illegally, that's something that we should be aware of. Even as a libertarian, I think I'm fine with that. There's no part of libertarian ideals that says that people are not allowed to voluntarily come together and protect themselves from true existential threat. And nobody's gonna say, oh man, but you know, a real libertarian would just leave the gates open on their military base. I'm a compromised libertarian, as most practical libertarians are.
One more from our audience. Would you oppose withholding technology to an authoritarian regime?
I would oppose it. I think I kind of tried to cover this a little bit earlier. I mean, it isn't up to me, and it shouldn't be up to me. It should be up to the United States government. I'll give an example that is not me, just to make this point. There were a lot of people who were really upset about the United States selling certain security systems to Turkey, which, remember, is a NATO ally on paper, also an authoritarian regime. And people were very upset about this. They said, why are we selling these security systems? Why would we do that? That doesn't make any sense. And does this mean the United States is supporting authoritarianism? And what came out later is the reason that we were doing this is because the United States was temporarily basing a bunch of nuclear-armed aircraft at their airfields secretly. Now, you could say that there's some moral high ground in not putting better security on the base where we're going to be having our own nuclear weapons. Or perhaps you could say we shouldn't even have aircraft there in the first place. But that decision shouldn't be up to me. I shouldn't sit here unaware of those aircraft, unaware of those weapons, unaware of the bigger picture, and also divorced from all the politicians who have been, at the end of the day, elected to make those decisions. I should not sit here as a corporate executive and say, I will de facto be the unilateral controller of US foreign policy. I, the corporate executive, get to decide who we are allowed to work with and who we are not, because that is a very dangerous path that puts power in the hands of people that should not have that power. That should be in the hands of people that you can elect a new leader to replace.
All right, as much as I could sit here forever and listen to this, I'm getting the flashing, please stop. It's time for a networking break. Last question from me. You sold a company once. What's your plan for Anduril? Would you sell it again? Do you want to go public? Where do you want to take the business?
The most likely outcome is that we become a publicly traded company. There's a lot of reasons for that. The government really likes to work with public companies where they don't have to worry if they're cooking their books. You've got all of Wall Street breathing down your neck trying to find out if you're lying to them and if they should short sell you after, of course, going on TV and telling everybody that you're a terrible company. And I think that that's a reasonable thing. It's also not really likely that we would be a good fit for any of the other defense contractors. I mean, we're a defense product company. We use our own money to decide what to build, how to build it, when it's done, and then we sell it to the government. We are building the tools that we think are maybe not the best way to make money, but they're the best way to equip partners like Ukraine, like Taiwan, with tools that they can use on day 1, day 10, day 100, day 1,000 of a potential conflict with the expansionist dictatorships that threaten them. And we get to make that decision because we're our own company, and we're not a cost-plus contractor that has to go after certain structures of contracts because it's the only way that they can make money. And so I think it's really unlikely that I'm gonna sell out to somebody again. I did it before. I've generally made a policy of trying to not make the same mistake twice.
All right, Palmer Luckey, everyone. Okay, we're all gonna take a deep breath after that one. We do have a networking break. Go get a glass of water and be back at 3:15 sharp. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Chang, and on my new show, The Circuit, I'll be talking with the big names in tech, culture, and innovation.
Think of the growth of your company. You have to grow faster.
There's a lot of little tricks here. This show is a conversation about success, about failure, about passion. We are following the biggest stories of the day and the people shaping tomorrow and asking, what's next?
This is a way to change culture.
Tune into The Circuit, only on Bloomberg Originals.
Let's go.
Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program will begin in 5 minutes. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program is about to begin. Please take your seats. The program will begin now. Please welcome to the stage Tonomus CEO Joseph Bradley.
Thank you. It's a great opportunity to talk to you today. When you think about what has been said, a lot has been talked about how do we deal with uncertainty. And on a personal level, I can tell you this is a challenge. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. And as I'm going through chemotherapy, you're looking for certainty. And certainty has been found in many worlds, in many areas, through technology. Technology has been that source where we look for certainty. And you think about COVID, what you saw is it pushed us to this notion that the world we can't touch, we can't feel, so it therefore must be digital. And then COVID goes away and that pendulum swings to the other side. And it was about, well, no, now we got to go back to being the physical world. And we talked about and debated this notion of the metaverse. Maybe it's a gaming platform. No, it's much more of a social platform, or it's more of a digital twin environment. Well, I'm here to tell you that is the wrong question. It's a false dilemma. I call it the singular reality. You see, it's not about living in the digital world. It's not about living in the physical world. It's just simply about living. And when we think about technologists and what we're doing and how we approach this topic, much of the day has been around the technology itself. Well, I'm here to tell you that we need to change that conversation. That conversation is about you as technologists, you as leaders, coming up and embracing the transformational challenge that you have to achieve today. We fundamentally live in a different world. And that world requires us as leaders to embrace 3 basic core fundamental truths that ultimately will change how we shape, how we view, and how we interact with generative AI and the various technologies. So if you believe in this notion of generative AI and you talk about the ability to gather data, one of the things that it's so important for you to embrace is the notion between diversity on the one hand and inclusion on the other. Are they the same? No, they're not. You see, diversity is the potential to create value. Inclusion is the realization of value by driving full participation. And that full participation, that is the secret weapon of generative AI. That is what you need to power and make this go. You need full participation. So if you believe in that, then therefore here comes the mind shift. You see, the physical world by definition is limited. It's limited to how many people can fit in a city. It's limited to how many people can fit in the room. You will never achieve the level of inclusion that you need to if you simply talk about the physical world. So you have to change your mindset. The physical world becomes an add-on to the digital. The physical world becomes an add-on to the digital. Okay, let's talk about the second paradigm shift. You see, algorithms are great. They're awesome. But they optimize for efficiency. Is that life? If I ask you, what's your purpose in life? You say to make money and breathe. That's a problem. Well, that's algorithms, right? They optimize for efficiency. You have to have the mind shift change and say, no, we are here to optimize and solve for the happiness paradigm. Happiness paradigm says it is about life. It is about you. It's about people. Great story happened in a Dutch supermarket. Basically, they use all these great algorithms and they said, you know what? We can make this supermarket far more efficient. You guys have seen those checkout lines. We go in, self-checkout, right? No problem. But they uncovered that when you talk to their senior citizen workforce, they said, you know what? It's abnormally depressed. Why is that? Because they were losing connection with people. And where did they go to find that connection with people? Well, they go to the supermarket. But what do we do as technologists? Get you in and get you out. So to allow them to connect with people, they created a slow checkout line. A line where they can get an opportunity to engage with people, to learn what's happening, how you doing, what's going on in your life, to connect with one another. That is solving for the happiness paradigm. Think about that as you think about how you want to use generative AI and how you want to use all the various technologies, machine vision, quantum computing. It's not solely about efficiency. Okay, this is probably the most disruptive of all the things we're going to talk about today. You see, we live in a world right now where all the answers are known. Therefore, value is in understanding what question to ask. Rise of the humanities, man. You know all those kids you told STEM was the only way? You told them, no, stop studying English, stop studying sociology. You told them learn to code. That's what you told them? Get out of here, learn to code, learn to code, learn to code. Uh-oh. What you gotta do now? No, it's not about learn to code. Learn to think. Learn to think. Because now what you have is you have an ability where a young woman or a young man in any part of the world with a cell phone in their hand is now on the same level playing field as one of the many tech giants. In other words, if you can think it, you can create it. If you can think it, you can create it. Understand what that means? That means everyone who went to MBA school, you know the rules? Ideate, build, operate. 20% of the time you spend on ideate. Build and operate is 80% of the value. Not anymore. Build and operate, man, that's gonna be done. The human-centric side is on the ideate side. That's where you get human centricity. And this is extremely disruptive. I love the debates. Is art art if it's created by a computer? You are talking about the wrong topic. You are worried about the output of the process. You should be talking about the input. Let me put it this way. A young girl who has lost the use of her arms, but in her heart and in her mind, she believes she is an artist. So she goes to that computer and she begins to talk. She begins to speak. And she creates art. Who says that's not art? Oh, you mean the guy? You mean the person with the paintbrush needs to sell that painting? That's not art. No. That's what they say, right? Wrong question. It's not about the output. It is fundamentally about the input process. That is the value. That is human centricity. That is where we can find the sources where we ultimately need to be and how we will ultimately drive value as we move forward. I will leave you with this. Many, many times, in many, many areas, we talk about so many social issues around the world. We talk about the need for equality. We talk about the need to give every person a voice. We talk about how similar the world can be in terms of crisis, and many, many great leaders. Where we find ourselves right now, in this moment, in a position where many of these leaders would have never dreamed we would be, where the ability to type in a few words into a search bar will be the greatest equalizer in modern day history. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great evening. When you think about the building blocks of the Cognitive City, data is really core. You get to decide which applications you want to use and what data you want to provide. It is built fundamentally around you. A smart city focuses on real-time information. A cognitive city already knows that real-time is too late. It's about how do we take friction out of your life. If we can find a place in the world where you can be the best of you, that's what fuels me.
Please welcome to the stage Conviction founder Sarah Gua and Runway co-founder and CEO Cristobal Valenzuela with Bloomberg's Lucas Shaw.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for sticking around, and thanks to both of you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
I think I counted this as one of 7 AI-themed panels on the day. This one we'll be talking about media, a subject of a lot of kind of consternation, at least in Los Angeles, where I live. But I wanted to start because I feel like so much of the discussion around AI is looking into the future and what will be, and I wanted to kind of level set with where we are now. So how is artificial intelligence being used in media today, and what are some of the most interesting applications that you've already seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think we already interact with media that's AI-driven every single day, right? I think the most popular example is going to be recommendation engines, right? Everybody uses social media that's entirely AI-driven. I think something else people probably don't realize is in your phone, like helping you take a quality picture, light adjustment, color balance, all of that is algorithm-driven, and so there's a huge number of ways from visual effects to social media to your tooling that is already enhanced. What I think is really exciting is like what is just coming online now, but I'm sure we'll talk about it.
Yeah, and I'll just like emphasize that. I think a lot of the media you consume now has been made or powered or enabled by some sort of algorithm behind the scenes. And so it's happening already, and will continue to happen more as the research continues to like improve. But again, it's very early on the journey, mostly on the generative side of things.
Yeah, and when you say what's most exciting is what's about to happen, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, well, Chris should definitely talk about what's happening with Runway. Maybe to use a slightly narrower example than just generate any video, one thing that we're really excited about at Conviction is what AI can do for creators in terms of modality and reach, right? You had, how many people were like video creators or photographers before Instagram and TikTok, right? Magnitudes fewer. And you can define like artistic skill in all of these things, but the tools definitely are democratizing. When I think about what's going to happen from modality and reach perspectives, like if you can take any text and make it human voice with companies like 11 or Element, or you can take that video and dub it in any language and extend your reach globally, like I think there are a lot of things for creators to be really excited about where it's completely feasible in research as of this year.
I think for me, I've been thinking a lot about how to understand what's going to happen next. And a great analogy I've found is to think about really these models and the capacity that we'll start to enable very soon as a new kind of camera, right? This is a device, it's a system that will allow us to do things that were very hard to do or almost impossible to even imagine before, right? So imagine 150 years ago when the camera was first invented and was first made possible, art changed forever. Stories we told each other changed forever. Aesthetics changed, media changed, industries changed. And I think we're entering a phase where like we're starting to use and create a new kind of camera, right? But the camera on its own doesn't do anything, right? You're not a photographer just because you own a camera. You're not a filmmaker just because you have a camera, right? And so if you think it from that perspective, it's a tool. And it's a tool that allows you to be very expressive and allows you to express and find new ways of telling stories like the camera did. And so when I think about that, we're early in understanding that it's going to happen. There's a revolution that happened in the early 1900s when that camera became visible. And I think we're entering in the kind of like a similar moment in time where something radically will change about the way we tell stories with this new camera.
How so? What, the movies that get put out 3 or 5 years from now, how does that differ?
Yeah, I think like the best movies are yet to be told, are yet to be made, right? And if you think about the history of like film, it's a very linear story, right? You make a film, you render the film today, digital means, and you distribute the film, right? We're gonna go from like render pixels, which is what we do today, to generated pixels, right? And the moment you can generate pixels, then you don't have a specific linear narrative. You can have multiple narratives. And you can be in a movie, and I can be in a movie, and we all can be in a show, right? And we can tell stories that are much more personalized and specific, right? The one thing that's hard to predict is we're in the, I would say, in the 1910s of the new camera, right? It's a silent camera, it's very clunky, doesn't work really that well. So understanding how far and how much it will change is still like very hard to predict. And so I don't know, I don't have all the answers yet. I'm trying to like work on it one step at a time.
Wouldn't you say, I'm curious, you say any of us can be in our own film. I mean, that's sort of what YouTube has done in a lot of ways already, right? It has democratized the creation of video such that, along with people armed with smartphones and cheap cameras, pretty much anybody can shoot anything and they can upload it for everyone to see. What is different in what you're talking about?
I think what's different now is that you don't, still making films is expensive, right? And creating like high quality content, it requires understanding of the craft, of that camera in particular that's gotten to be not necessarily as easy as an algorithm that can allow you to render and create content in ways that perhaps were very prohibited before. So for example, there's this film director who's been working with traditional film like tools for the last 10, 15 years, right? And CGI, as you can imagine, is very expensive. It requires a lot of hard work, right? And shooting live action is also expensive, right? And we gave him access to our new model. It's a model that does video generation conditioned to different mechanisms of either input or text or images or video. And he was able to render and synthesize a story, a very surreal story. It's a beautiful story. I recommend you watching it. That involves people in a room, the room full of water, then the same person in like, the desert, right? And it works really well. Critics saw it and praised it, right? It's really good. Now making that movie before Gen 2, which is the algorithm we created, would have taken him months on a large budget. It took him a day. And so that for me is the change.
One of the ways I like to think about it is things like YouTube or TikTok, they created distribution platforms, and they sort of proved how compelling your own niche was. What Chris or Lucas or Sarah finds funny is very different, right? And so you can have production quality and scope go down dramatically as long as it's exactly what you as a person find entertaining or interesting or funny. And I think what we're going to see with this next generation of tools is what if everybody can produce at approximately today's Hollywood quality? What if real professional studios can do that, but at personalization scale for every person? I think that is a really bright future for media. I'll give you one more really small example that's easy to picture. There's this expression that everyone's born an artist until they forget how to be. I think every child, every person is born a storyteller. And one of the ways that I really see this is I have young kids, and we do story time every night. And now we do story time with image generation, right? And I think of story time as a kid as maybe my favorite book was Matilda or Harry Potter or whatever the character was. The way my kids do story time is they're going to tell me the stories, and the stories are about them in their movie with a three-headed unicorn that's a recurring character doing very specific things where they want to shape the narrative and the visuals, and they'll tell me no, you need to in-paint that and like change exactly how it's placed. And so I think that this idea that people are going to want to direct more of their own media is actually very natural.
Right, the idea that you don't need to rely on Sony to make the next Spider-Man, you can make your own at home in your own way.
Well, they'll want both, right? Especially if the quality goes up.
Do you think, does the potential democratization of a lot of these technologies allowing people to make studio quality projects at home, what risk does that pose to sort of professionals already in the industry today?
I'm not sure that there's a ceiling to how, like, the level of quality that people want in their entertainment, if that makes sense, right? Like, I'm pretty sure the studios are going to figure out interesting things to do with their budget levels and a new set of tools, right? So I'm expecting that you raise the floor and, like, everybody can create many different things, but a Hollywood 10 years from now is just much better than Hollywood is today.
Yeah, and I will also argue that it's going to be different, and it's different, right? So you can continue to have like Hollywood quality content at a scale that's different from what one single person like you can create in your house with your kids, right? And those both can live, right? It's like painting for years allowed for one type of storytelling, the camera route for another one, but you still have both, right? It's not the replacement of the other.
Right. That doesn't. I'm just curious, given how you both feel on this. Are you following the labor strife in Hollywood at all? Because it feels like writers, for example, are very freaked out about the idea that studios will just kind of train some kind of AI model to replace them and get their ideas there instead of them writing it themselves. It sounds like you don't share that fear.
I mean, first of all, I have deep empathy for that. I've started Runway while I was in art school. And so I want to build tools for artists, right? And I've always thought about it from the perspective of building expressive, controllable tools for making art, right? Yet the one thing I think I've noticed is there's a lot of thoughts around AI that come from a place of not ever using a system, right? Generative video model or an image model. And I think the reductionist view of thinking about AI as a language model, I think we see that a lot of like AIs, LLMs, and like language models doesn't like really allow us to understand the nuances of how the systems work in particular domains that are very different, right? So for a VFX artist or for a visual artist or for a video editor, helping them reduce 70% of their time they're spending on something they don't want to do, which is time consuming and expensive, it's great, it's phenomenal, right? It's super liberating. And I think we're going to start to see more of that, and sometimes perhaps it might be hard to understand those things.
I was talking to a friend of mine who is a producer for a hit show, and I asked him, like, what do you think is going to happen to the writer's room? The writer's room is only 10 people right now, and he's like, well, I think what's going to happen is it goes down to like the 2 people that are showrunners today, and we do 4 more shows, right? And I think that's more likely. His rationale, just being somebody who's actually thinking through like the labor equation here is you still want to set direction, even given these tools. And in any industry, I don't know if this is a popular view or not, but there is some part of what is knowledge and creative work that is more of the toil of it, right? So if you're like the writer that is working for the showrunner, just filling in the script for whatever they've described to you, like maybe part of that workflow does get replaced. But I think the opportunity is that like you actually, like, who do they want making the final jokes and like putting in the nuances of how these characters relate to each other? Never mind all of the limitations of language models today where they don't have like memory and consistency and controllability the way you'd want. Like there's a human element that I think people will always want. And I think we'll just see repopulation to more forms of efficient creation.
Right. And just to add to that, one thing that happens is this has happened multiple times in the history of media. Like films used to be silent and used to have an orchestra, right? And so when audio was possible in movies, a big question was what's going to happen with the orchestra in movies, right? Someone needs to pay for that. And the truth is that, sure, that disappeared, but a lot of more value and opportunities were created with audio inside movies.
Got it. So there are a lot of people who are members of the orchestra today that...
It's going to change.
The only thing that scares me most about that prediction is if people feel, I think most people probably feel overwhelmed by the amount of video, audio that they have to keep up with today. If we're going to be quadrupling or quintupling that, I don't really look forward to it. But I'm sure it will lead to many great things.
Yeah, it's maybe a little bit adjacent to the exact topic of the panel, but I do think that the idea of information, media, entertainment overload is a very common one. I feel this too. Like nobody wants to be doom scrolling and being like, I didn't cover this corner of pop culture all my friends know about.
Yeah.
Especially a news editor, right?
Yeah.
But I think one thing that I hope to see that a lot of people are working on are agents that, like services that are intelligent, that work on behalf of individuals to go sort that out, right? If there's AI that learns your preferences, learns what you're interested in, and then parses what you need to know from all of your different sources and what you're going to find most funny, most interesting, most willing to share, I feel like that solves some of the problem.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we were actually at a dinner last night. We were talking about sort of hyper personalization with AI and that being a big part of the future that we don't yet have. Historically, you brought up the transition from sort of silent movies to talkies, as they were known. You look in the last kind of 20, 30 years at how new technologies have shaped or reshaped media. It's usually text and music that get hit first, because video is more complex. So I guess I have one selfish question and then a quick follow-up. Selfish one is, should I be worried that my job will be rendered obsolete in the next 5 years? And then the second is, what do you feel, or do you feel that we'll follow a similar trajectory with how AI sort of reshapes media in terms of sort of the stages at which the different businesses can be impacted?
I think AI will change everything, and AI will change nothing. Right? You're going to change a lot of the processes and the work that you try to do, but over time, it's still a work that you do, right? It's the human that's in the loop, and the human, as Sarah was saying, that curates and defines the stories that we're going to tell. And so if you're a reporter, if you're a storyteller, you still will be in control, in the same way they're in control with the camera, right? And so the nature of work, of every work, will change. But I think it's important to be nuanced and specific around how it will change, because not everyone will be using these models in the same way. The same, like an editor is not going to use a language model in the same way that a VFX supervisor will use it for another kind of like thing. And we're still early in understanding those kind of changes. So it's yet to be seen, I would say.
What are the hardest parts of being an editor?
Well, the hardest part of being there's the reporting and then there's the editing. I'd say with the reporting, it's developing sources and finding information that nobody else has, right? That's what makes someone good or bad.
Yeah.
That's the part that I think AI would have a very hard time replacing.
Yeah.
Editing is a mix of managing people and also managing copy, and that managing people is probably more tricky.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who's like started an AI fund, is quite bullish on the capabilities here. I think we're pretty far away from replacement of those couple capabilities you mentioned.
Are there any companies that you've seen in the last 6 months that most excite you? Like what are one or two that stand out?
Within media?
With some connectivity to media.
Yeah, well, I mean, genuinely, I think like Runway is a really amazing company doing both like amazing tools and really interesting work. I mentioned briefly this company Element before, LMNT, and I don't think it's like considered a big industry the way like software generation of imagery may not have been considered a big imagery before Midjourney became a popular tool. But the ability to take any media, and I think this is especially relevant to like text-first publications, but the ability to take any media and turn it into the forms that your readership or your listenership or your audience wants is a pretty powerful thing. And I think the ability to be immediately local is a pretty powerful thing. And so I think the use cases we've seen for synthetic voice generation are like a lot experimental today, or like pretty obvious, right? Oh, I wrote an essay, like can we make it a podcast? Or I want to go use it somewhere we already have robotic voices, like call centers or like videos for HR compliance or something. I don't think that's the interesting stuff at all. I think it's coming down the line where any media you create as simply as like writing a note is going to be expressible in many different ways globally. And so I just think that's really powerful.
What did you, only somewhat related to it, but I'm curious, what did you make of the Drake Weekend song that freaked everyone out about where music is going?
I think it's pretty good. So I'd start with that. And I think it's a pretty complicated question from a rights perspective, right? But I do think it's something that we want to grapple thoughtfully with as an industry, because on the one hand, there's a huge opportunity for artists to allow their audiences or create themselves much more. Because I mean, if you ever listen to your favorite artist on repeat for a 6-hour drive or something, what does that tell you? That's a demand signal that you wish there was more Rihanna out there, right? But if you can produce it, I think that's a really interesting opportunity. I don't know what the answer is, except that we're going to get better at predicting what people want, and we can generate it. And it's really an ethics question of who gets to control that.
Well, do you find it? Do you guys think it's inevitable that people that are kind of developing LLMs will license essentially from studios, music rights holders, news organizations?
I don't have a good answer on this. I think it would be hard to imagine producing things that were exactly in the voice and style of a known artist without their permission, and that's what their audiences would want, right?
Right, because if people want more Rihanna, you probably need to go to Rihanna to make that happen.
Right.
Okay, I think we've just about hit time, but is there anything we didn't cover?
No, I think it's a very exciting time. This camera is just being put out, and so I'm very excited to see what people and filmmakers and news storytellers are going to use and make with the camera. So excited to see what's going to happen.
Cool. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Please welcome to the stage Brex co-founder and co-CEO Enrique Dubragras and Piermont Bank founder and CEO Wendy Kai Lee with Bloomberg's Tom Giles.
All right, Wendy, Enrique, thanks for joining me today. We're here to talk about a few things that changed between startups and financial services firms a couple of months ago. I want you all to hearken back to where you were in early March. Second week of March, if you were a startup, you were probably wondering how you were going to make payroll. If you were a venture capital firm, you were probably advising your startups to take the money and run. We actually, I'm going to start with you, Enrique. We had a conversation with you that weekend about the impact on companies like yours. Some of the things that you told us at the time, Brex had received more than $1 billion in payroll loan requests just on that Thursday, that critical Thursday when people started vacating Silicon Valley Bank. You saw record inflows of money being deposited. Talk a little bit more about that weekend, and can you kind of quantify a little bit more from us now that the dust has settled? What kind of impact the problems in the regional banks had, and what kind of impact that had for you at Brex?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, thank you so much for having me. I definitely remember that weekend. It's probably one of the craziest experiences of my professional career. And we first originally heard something was happening around Thursday. And we had a little bit of our own money there, so we decided to take it out. And we started just seeing the inflow of deposits like we've never seen before. But at that time, it was still just a lot of fear. On Friday, then it was announced what was happening. And we saw a huge rush of people opening accounts with us. And I think one of the reasons we were so popular, people opening accounts, is because we could actually open accounts the same day. Because a lot of our systems were automated in account opening versus most of the banks would take a few days or a week. And if people needed to make payroll on a Monday, it was Friday, weekends, everything, it would be hard, right? So we saw almost 5,000 account openings that weekend. I think around $3 billion of deposits came over that next week or so. And we didn't know exactly if we were going to stick or not going to stick, if people were going to stay or not stay. Most of them actually did stay, which was honestly surprising for us. And I think that it definitely changed the landscape. And I think that the biggest way it changed the landscape is that most customers now don't want to concentrate their relationship in one partner. They actually want to have multiple partners, and I think that's here to stay.
Wendy, you have started a digital-only commercial bank. You target specifically fintech companies. Can you talk about how and to what extent did the events of early March 2023 change the ways startups, new companies think about their relationship with banks?
Yeah, and I think before March 10th, banks, regulated banking institution, at best was being viewed as a partner. Mostly it's really a service provider. I think that after March 10th, most of our, at least, tech customers realized that, wait a second, the banking relationship is critical, and that the regulatory environment, I should say the regulators, has immediate and critical impact to their business. It's no longer a couple of steps removed. And that outside of the banking industry, it's difficult for people, I shouldn't say difficult, I think it's underappreciated that the banking regulators, they're the rule setter, they're the enforcer, they're judge and jury. So it's not like there are rooms for negotiation, for discussion. So if they deem an institution has weakness, they can come in, and they did what they did, right? I'm not here to discuss in terms of what's warranted, what's not, et cetera. I think that's been covered relentlessly. But I think it's the relationship that were at one time deemed very indirect, very remote, becomes very real and very critical to them.
For both of you, when you look back on that, and when you think about the things that were happening at the banks that ended up in receivership, do you look at that and were there takeaways? What were some of the lessons? And were there things that those banks were doing that you have decided we won't do that, or we will scale back how much we do that?
You want to go? Well, Piermont is a regulated bank, and we could talk about it as a non-regulated institution. For us, the lesson learned, I think, is a couple of things. One is that the definition of institution that has systemic importance. I think we all know that right now, any banks can create systemic issue and weakness. I think that's a lesson learned for all parties, especially for the regulators. That came as a surprise. Second is really the speed of your deposit that can run out the door. I've said, I think during our call, that if this was 1965, people are lining up outside of every SVB branch, and 3 o'clock comes around, branch closed, or that we ran out of the cash and they're waiting for the trucks to deliver next day, they would have never had 25% cash go out the door within 4 to 6 hours. So we're looking at an entirely different landscape, and that also caught everyone by surprise. Not sure why, myself included. We all know that payments, money moves around a lot faster, but I don't think anybody really thought of this from a bank run standpoint. So that's second. So no deposit is safe. And lastly, I would just say that it's the potential regulatory environment swing to the extreme end. So post-08 crisis, we saw that, and we are fully anticipating that. We're already seeing that. Even in the last 2 weeks, the FDIC have issued interagency guidance on how banks should really work with fintech partners and how banks need to treat the end users of a fintech. So all that is going to create more friction, right, versus taking frictions away. That's going to create adding more costs to doing business with a bank. And it's actually going to hinder, I think, the speed of product innovation for those banks that are actively supporting the fintech ecosystem. So the list is actually not short. Hate to say that.
Yeah, so for us, we are not a bank, and I would say that before SVB, we had to explain that a lot, and it was a detractor. It's like, why would I leave money with a non-bank? And after that, it actually became a good thing. And the reason is, banks fundamentally, the business is you deposit your money with a bank, and they're going to lend out your money, right? And the concept of a bank run is, well, they lent out your money, and then everyone tried to get the money all at the same time, and the money was lent out or was bought in different assets, so there's no money, right? And we as a non-bank, we don't do that because we can't, regulatory-wise, and obviously we lose some money by not doing it, but at the same time, you know, if everyone were to take their money out today, all the money would come out because we can't do anything with the money. And I think a lot more customers just got a lot more aware of those dynamics, of the difference between a bank and a non-bank, where their money is going. And I think that the increased scrutiny from the customer perspective actually I think it's good for the industry because it does allow customers to understand what risks they're actually taking. And so I think that I agree that it will probably add regulation and friction to the system. But I do think the silver lining is that increased customer education of where their money is going is probably a positive for us.
Enrique, I want to stay with you for just a second. Right before March, I think it was in February, you raised a funding round. How much runway does that give you? And right now, what are your priorities in terms of how you're allocating resources, both in terms of like your target customers, the kinds of products that you're offering?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last time we raised equity money was around May or June 2022. I think in aggregate, Brex history raised a little bit over $1.5 billion in equity. And you know what we do disclose is that all the money we raise is enough to get us to cash flow positive and profitability without having to raise any more money. The pace of those investments obviously is a little bit dependent on a lot of factors, but you know, we don't expect to raise any more money anytime soon. A lot of our investments have been going into our new software platform, Empower, which is a spend management solution, let's say replacing Concur for businesses. So now we can replace Concur, American Express, and do kind of like, you know, a lot of banking services as well. And another big part is on global expansion. We announced recently that we can support customers in over 36 countries, and you know, that number has been growing. So those are probably two big areas of investment for us.
Wendy, when you talk about Piermont, you use the phrase, our mission is to grow as quickly and relevantly as our customers. Again, a lot of them fintechs, obviously not exclusively. You've raised $90 million so far. How far are you from needing to raise again, and what are your spending priorities, your investment priorities?
Sure. Well, banks are a little different, right? There's actually such a thing as overcapitalization in regulated banks. So we actually don't need to raise as much as probably our fintech counterparts. So we have already turned a profit. The bank's raised capital is really for asset growth standpoint. It's a leverage point, but we're sitting on a ton of capital as well as cash. So yeah, I mean, it's nice not to have to worry about the burn.
Yep. Enrique, you talked about that path to profitability, not needing to raise again. Timeline-wise, what are you thinking about in terms of how long it's going to take to reach that milestone that you set? And secondly, how are you balancing the kind of advantages of being a publicly traded company against what a lot of the startups tell us are, you know, some of the detractors, some of the downsides?
Yeah, absolutely. So we absolutely want to be a publicly traded company. We're definitely not in the category of like, oh, we could stay private forever if we could. I think there's a lot of advantages for a business like ours being publicly traded. That being said, I do want to be a low volatility publicly traded company because I don't believe that massive stock swings are good to operate. I think it's very distracting for everyone involved. So I would say that being profitable is probably one of the few things that do reduce volatility as being a public stock. So I would say those things are pretty correlated. That being said, we're still, even though we raise a lot of money, have a high valuation, we're still 6 years old. So I would expect us to, you know, wait until at least year 9 or 10 to do something.
Wendy, you said you turned a profit 7 months ahead of time. what are the milestones that you need to see before you can start having the conversation about becoming a publicly traded company?
Sure. So banks go public for, I think, perhaps a slightly different reason. It's really for having another currency to do M&A more than anything else. So I think given the events of the last few months, I think that has changed the mind of, frankly, my own investors in terms of not being a publicly listed bank, because someone can just short your stock and create a ton of volatility to your operations and to your survival, actually. So normally in the past, for banks is that you want to get to about $1.5 billion in total assets to have a meaningful listing. So that's normal. But for us, it's about being the most profitable commercial bank rather than chasing the asset size at the moment.
I want to stay with you, Wendy, for a moment. And this ties back to the SVB question. You are female-founded, female-led. You have a female board chair. More than half of your loans, if my math is right, are to low and moderate income communities, women and minority-owned businesses. You've talked about the importance of diversity, but right now we're at a time when it's become quite fashionable to be a detractor on DE&I, to say that this is a distraction, to write op-eds for the Wall Street Journal and say maybe that's what got bank such and such bank into trouble. Can you talk about do you still think diversity is important, and why is that? Why is it important as a business case? And this is the kind of thing that you're going to have conversations with eventual investors in the public.
Yeah. So for us, diversity and supporting minority-owned, women-run, whether it's funds or startups, it's not an initiative. It's very inherently part of our DNA. So it's not something that we said, okay, let's strip out this part of the balance sheet and park this amount of money to support that. I think that's really where it becomes potentially a distraction in an environment like this. So for us, it has always been built as part of the DNA. So that's for one thing. Second is that for us, that's where there's a large market share that has not been paid attention by the larger banks. That's the truth, right? And part of that is how do you be relevant? It is very difficult, actually, for legacy banks to move fast and to stay relevant because the processes, the so-called mid and back office, they just can't, even if they want to and they recognize the needs, they just cannot move that fast. So then if you make that an initiative, then it becomes a real distraction to your operation. But for us, we're naturally built that way, right? So we opened in 2019. Today, we're still the only truly full-scope commercial bank got chartered since the financial crisis, which is 2008, right? So when we built this, we spent over 9 months reverse engineer the entire how the commercial banks is run. Because people often associate innovation with technology only. But in banking, it's not only technology, right? I always say Jamie Dimon can outspend anyone in technology, right? It's about innovation in process. It's sustainable innovation, right? So being very deliberate to change your products, services, and how you deliver that. And I think that's really what this is about. I know I'm sort of going off your topic a little bit, but it comes back to that. As long as you build something and you have a process that's relevant, then supporting a particular demographic is not a distraction. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's built, I think, fundamentally, when you don't have legacy process, legacy issues, it becomes less of a burden when you singularly try to help a particular marketplace.
Enrique, does having conversations about diversity, is that something that is a priority for you and you have conversations with your board? How do you avert the likelihood of it becoming a distraction or somehow a problem or part of the rhetoric?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So for us, since the beginning of Brex, we, as Pedro, my co-founder, and I, we're both Brazilian, we're both immigrants. We came here for college. And one of the first problems we were trying to solve was people who couldn't get credit cards. And you went through the trouble. You found a way to raise millions of dollars from venture capitalists, and then you got to a bank, and they wouldn't give you a card. And that made no sense in our head. Like, how is it that I already fought all the challenges up to get millions of dollars in my corporate bank account, and they still won't give me a credit card? And we created a super objective metric to assess risk that was actually how much money you've raised, right? So, and that way, it was extremely objective. And I think that, every time we're looking, and now we're expanding globally similarly, right? Like, a lot of times, the international employees of a company, they have less, it's much harder to be an international employee. They don't get access to corporate cars. They have to take weeks to get their expenses reimbursed. If they have to travel, they have a debit card, it needs to be out of pocket. So we try to facilitate all of that with all of our products and make the world, a little bit more global in that respect.
You are both your companies have a lot in common, including leveraging technology to disrupt traditional providers of the services that you are out there working on. But we're starting to see new entrants, startups like Ramp, big tech players like Apple. What are you doing, Wendy, both of you, what are you doing to ensure that you stay credible at a time when the barriers to entry seem only to be falling?
Well, I think, again, as a regulated institution, it is a little different because the barrier to entry is very, very high. Going through the approval, getting FDIC insurance, and getting the bank charter. With that said, from the existing bank population, more and more of them recognize the need to support this new innovative ecosystem, and they see the deposits opportunity, they see the fee income opportunity. But the issue is that, again, it's regulation, right? And with the banks, the legacy processes, the legacy technology is often what holds them back. So for me, for Piermont Bank, to answer your question, is continue to be able to stay relevant, which requires the ability to pivot accordingly. Not be, not build technology, not build processes that one day I become just one of them, right? And keeping it clean and keeping it simple, so.
Yeah, so I think one thing in fintech or banking is that it is not a winner-takes-all market. I think this is a pre-COVID stat, but before COVID, there was 44 banks just in the United States that were worth more than $10 billion in market cap. So think about it, it's 44 companies that kind of do the same thing that are worth more than $10 billion. And I think it's because there's so much nuance in different sectors, different sizes, different product sets, that I think there's a lot of space for innovation, and disrupting the traditional players.
Wendy, Enrique, thanks a lot for joining us. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Cowboy Ventures founder and managing partner Aileen Lee and Sequoia Capital partner Alfred Lin with Bloomberg's Emily Chang.
Hi. Again, thank you. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
You guys have known each other for a long time.
Yep, we have.
And you've been in the industry for a long time.
That's right.
And we're not going to belabor the point.
You're calling us old?
You're three-cycle investors.
That's right. That's what they call us, three-cycle investors.
So you've been in tech through the dot-com bust, through the recession, and through whatever this thing is that we're in now.
The downturn.
Where are we? What is this? Where are we in the cycle?
You want to start?
No, you can start.
I think we're in a downturn and we're still going down. Mm-hmm. So I think we've got a while to go. It's going to be pretty bumpy for a while longer.
Alfred, how bad does it get and how long does it last?
I don't know if it's, I'm not a macroeconomist. Most of the people here aren't. I'm not going to predict how long or how bad, but it's always a good time to start a company if you have a great idea. So yeah. I wouldn't just focus on the negatives. I'd focus on all the innovation that's happening. There's always a tug of war in Silicon Valley between creative innovation and some constraints that is happening. Right now, the constraint is much higher interest rates and much higher cost of capital. But there's a ton of innovation happening.
Absolutely.
And so I would focus on that.
So in 2008, Sequoia said, RIP, good times. 2020 was Black Swan. 2022 was Adapting to Endure, a little fancier.
Adapting to endure. That is fancy.
What would you say today? What's 2023?
I would say it's a tug of war between creative innovation and the constraints that we face. And I think founders don't start companies because of any cycle. Whether it's a downturn or an upturn, you start a company because you have a great idea. And so there's a tug of war going on, and your job is to figure out how to creatively find solutions to both. Cost of capital being higher is, that could be, you can think of it as a problem, or you can think of it as an opportunity. And the things that worked for the last 15 years because interest rates was close to zero, that's out the window. You have to find a new set of playbooks.
That's right.
If you had a slogan, what would it be?
I was thinking about this because I had a feeling you were going to ask about it. And so I was thinking, okay, it could be the age of deathicorns.
Mm-hmm. This is coming from the unicorn lady. Aileen coined the term unicorn as it pertains to tech
and maybe we'll talk
companies.
about this a little bit, but I think obviously there are a lot of companies that raised a lot of money at very high valuations that will probably not stay there if and when they have to reprice. And then I was like, oh, this is too sad, a little too morbid. And then I was thinking, it's maybe the age of Ozempic. Right, which is like companies have to kind of put themselves on a diet. Right? Like if you don't know what Ozempic is, it's this diet drug that helps you eat less, right? And so it kind of reduces your appetite. And so I think we lived in this age of chasing growth where capital was free, so you could spend a lot of money. Speed and growth was more important than focus or discipline. And now everyone has to focus. They have to probably do less, chase less, focus more. And the constraints will create a lot of creativity. And it's like people kind of, I guess, like people who have taken Ozempic say, like, I was really surprised that I don't need to eat as much as I was to be healthy. I think a lot of companies will do more with less and become healthier. But I think actually the thing I thought of last was maybe it's a return to ramen.
Oh, we're getting really creative.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I brought you each a little present, just, to usher in the age of ramen.
Should we eat this now?
I prefer ramen to Ozempic.
You do? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you haven't heard this, so I think Paul Graham popularized this term ramen profitability, right? Which is like get your company to a place where you're making enough that you can actually pay for the living expenses of the founders. Pay attention to margins, pay attention to team quality, customer obsession, and how much money you're spending. And I think that's probably what we're getting back to.
I want to talk a little bit about the term unicorn because I've heard some people say we shouldn't even be trying to be unicorns, and that messed everything up. How do you respond to that? Like all these people all these companies trying to be a billion-dollar company.
That was
when
like a
really,
weird, twisted perversion of the idea, right? The whole original idea was like, it's hard to build a billion-dollar company. Because, 5 or 10 years ago, to build a billion-dollar company, you had to generate $200 million in revenue or $300 million in revenue, right? So that means you have to be really smart about what you're building, about your revenue quality, about your team execution. And it was just about also just how hard it is and how rare it is. So I think we're probably going back to that as well. It's a special thing.
PitchBook says roughly 1/3 of VC-backed unicorns, and there are more than 400 of them, haven't raised money since 2021. What's in store for them, Alfred?
I think a lot of companies raised a lot of money in 2021, and so they're going on their diet. They're trying to figure out how to have as much of a runway as possible, and they're trying to build and grow into their valuation. I think the issue with the term unicorn is not the term, it's the fact that people were chasing a vanity metric, which is valuation, as opposed to just core fundamental financial metrics. Like going back to basics, as Aileen was talking about. We had Brian Chesky at our first base camp, and he told the audience at Sequoia founders, people used to call us a unicorn, but it really now feels like a unicorn when we have $1 billion in revenue. And then we had him back in this past year at our recent base camp, and he's generating $1 billion a quarter in cash flow.
Wow, that's
so
awesome.
that's called a real unicorn, in my opinion.
That's a real business.
That's a real business.
How is the volatility changing the way Sequoia is investing?
Volatility? What volatility?
The broader economy.
We don't measure things on it. The best part about the private business, it doesn't affect volatility. We don't watch the public markets day to day and see whether it swings up or down. And the best part about investing for the long run is you're focused on enduring companies. You're focused on category-defining companies that can last for a long, long period of time. And I go back to what, we're going to probably talk about AI, but think about what Jensen did when he started NVIDIA. It wasn't even about AI. It was about a GPU. It's about graphics. It was about processing and calculating things in a different way. He was solving a very hard problem because floating point computing was what the CPU did really well, and he wanted to multiply something called matrices. And now we're using that for AI. But accelerated computing took a long time to develop. He's been at it for 30 years. And that started with a seed investment from Sequoia of $1 million. We, over time, invested about less than $4 million into this company. It went public, and we distributed it when it was at 20x. Imagine if we had the Sequoia Capital Fund back then, because I think the current holdings, if we held it to today, it would be worth $58 billion.
Not bad. That's a unicorn.
Yeah.
That's a unicorn. Well,
what about Cowboy?
I mean, I think it's funny. Before I went into venture, I worked in the fashion business. I worked at Gap, and they seem like they're very different businesses. But you and I both know this, right? Like,
yeah. We both worked in fashion.
Yeah, we both worked in fashion businesses, right? It's like trends, like they come and go. And there are cycles in economies, there are cycles in business. We're in a tech cycle where I think people bought a lot of best of breed. There was an app for everything in the past 5 years. We are kind of moving back into a consolidation cycle where CFOs, CIOs, CISOs are saying, hey, we have too many SaaS vendors. We need to kind of whittle the number of vendors that we have. Not everyone can bring their app and expense it. So the bar, at least because we invest in a lot of enterprise software, I think the bar is a lot higher right now to be able to sell a new enterprise software package to the enterprise. But I think the reason why people will buy new software in the future is AI. It's going to drive a whole new generation of applications that are going to be AI native, and it's going to deliver completely different benefits than older software. So that's pretty exciting. And I think it's going to be, valuations are lower, teams are going to be more disciplined. So I do think, just like after the Great Recession, some really incredible companies are going to be built in the next couple of years.
There was quite a big unicorn that recently became a deathcorn. Alfred, you were a big investor in FTX. Sequoia was a big investor in FTX. So much has been made of the cult of personality of Sam and how many smart people were duped. I don't know how you would describe it, but lessons learned there?
So yesteryear.
Oh, no.
But I think, some key learnings. I think I learned a really hard lesson, but I learned that I have really great partners. We talk about Sequoia, that's a Sequoia investment. It's not my investment or someone else's investment, and I really felt supported during that time from all of my partners. I also just looked at the work that we did, 15 different ways. We probably would have made the investment again. So the lesson learned there is one that's really hard to take, which is we're in the venture business, and there are going to be losses. And while it stings to lose $150 million from our global growth fund, it's 2 to 3% of that fund. And our LPs pay us to take calculated risk. And we're going to lose sometimes. There are companies that are going to surprise us to the upside, like Airbnb and DoorDash and NVIDIA and Google, and then there are going to be companies that are not going to do very well. And we have to be comfortable with that. And that is actually the most uncomfortable feeling, where you look at the data, you would have done it again, and yet at the same time, you have to be okay with it.
Aileen, what's your take on that? I mean, the sort of the cult of the founder.
Alfred and his colleagues are incredible investors. I mean, they're really the best in the business. So it's almost reassuring that they're not they don't bat 1,000, because it seems like they bat 1,000.
We don't.
The reality is nobody bats 1,000 in this business. If you're lucky, you're batting 300 or 400, right? It's about slugging percentage in a lot of It's not really about like, you know, I know a little bit more about softball, but it happens, you know, and these a very high integrity person, so it happens.
The thing that I would even say it's even worse than batting 300, it's you're going to lose money 10 to 50% at a time, depending on the scale of the business.
Yeah.
In the venture business, you're likely to lose money 30 to 50% of the time. In the growth business, 10 to 20% of the time. It is painful to realize those losses, but we are in a sense, a trust business. We have to trust the founders and what they tell us, because if we don't trust them, then we're not going to invest in the company. And sometimes our trust will be misplaced.
Is Sequoia still committed to crypto?
Yeah, we're still very excited about the concepts of crypto because the idea of creating trust where trust didn't exist before is very appealing. Now, are we fans of certain things that happened during the boom? No. But this is a sort of area where it happens, you go from place to place to place, and there's a reason why things are inflated, because it's just something interesting in that space. You have to separate the noise from the signal, and you have to find the interesting companies. Going back to, you know, calling us 3-cycle investors, the internet index dropped by 90% between 1999 and 2001. That doesn't mean that there weren't great companies that came out of the internet. And in fact, the internet is bigger today than it was in 2001. But you had to be aware that you're going to take some lumps and losses, and you hopefully pick some good ones.
Yeah. I think the thing that's hard is obviously during downturns, people lose their jobs. People are forced to move out of tech. People's money are lost, not just institutional investors. And I think that's really hard and something we would love to avoid.
So a topic that's not so yesteryear is Sequoia's restructuring. You are parting ways with Sequoia China, India, Southeast Asia. Untangle this for us and the motivations.
Parting ways. So it's actually 5 business units. There's a US-Europe business, that is Sequoia Capital, the private business. There's what we call the heritage business, that is for our founders and our partners, and also some select endowments. There's our hedge fund business, which is SCGE. There's our India, Southeast Asia business, and then there's also our China business. And those 5 businesses have always been independently owned and operated. I don't actually have any influence on the decision-making in any of the other 4 business lines. That's always been the case. The only difference now is we don't share the back office anymore. And that's partly because there was a fair amount of brand confusion, and we think that it would be better if all 5 of these businesses were seen as separate entities. And our LPs, and our customers, our LPs and our founders couldn't be happier.
Aileen, what's your take on this? You know, obviously firms have changed.
So far, Cowboy India and Cowboy China are all staying. I'm just kidding. No, I mean, I don't know what to say about that.
Well, I do want to have one more question about the China thing, because, you know, a lot has been made about Sequoia's lobbying in DC and what has come to be called your China problem. What did the geopolitics have to do with it?
Geopolitics was not the primary driver. It's a factor, but it wasn't the primary driver, because if it was just China, then we would just do that with China. We have 5 separate businesses now. And so I don't think that was ever going to be a primary reason, because the primary reason is how we best serve our limited partners and our founders.
So let's talk about then where you are doubling down and focusing. I don't know if it's necessarily more on the early stage, right? But that was sort of my interpretation of what was said about where your part of the firm's focus is going to be now.
We're still focused, as always, on idea to IPO and beyond, helping founders, daring founders to start at the seed and invest in them from idea to IPO and beyond. That's always been the mission.
Yeah. Aileen, as someone who's been, you've been in seed since the beginning, right?
Well, I started out doing, at Cowboy, yes.
Right. I mean, I think, and I don't want to say going back to your roots, but, we are seeing this trend of firms changing especially in the economy, making different decisions.
Yeah.
Is that, is this going to define the next decade of venture investing?
So, I mean, we were debating this a little bit before because I think it's Bill Gurley who said that your fund size is your strategy. So, you know, I think large multi-stage firms, it doesn't really make sense, and it doesn't serve founders the best for them to do much seed investing. Or they should be really clear with the founders, like, look, we're partially doing seed investing because we want to make sure we have a shot at the A or a shot at the B or the shot at the C, but we're a really big fund. We have to deliver giant returns, and we kind of have to titrate our time on the companies that are kind of more de-risked to be able to deliver us the return. So we are happy to co-invest with multi-stage firms at seed, but I'm a fan of like kind of stage focus. At seed, companies are very raw. We often invest pre-product, and so our team is kind of built to be able to take on that kind of a risk and assess those folks and like kind of do all the heavy lifting and then hopefully graduate them to great Series A and B investors. But I think a lot of maybe not you all are kind of unicorns in your own right, but a lot of multi-stage firms are going to pull back from the seed business because I don't think it makes sense for them.
All right, so let's talk about AI. We've been talking about it all day long. Sam Altman obviously was here this morning. Is AI the next big thing or the next big bubble?
The next bubble? Is that what you said? Oh, it's both.
How much is hype? How much is reality? Are we in the new spin cycle, or is this going to be real, truly defining technology?
I think I don't like the term, I would say this, I don't like the term artificial intelligence.
Ooh.
I like the term AI to mean augmented intelligence. We've been investing in augmenting our intelligence for a long time. And so if you look at the trend of that and how technology has augmented our productivity, that has happened for much longer than either of us have been investors. So let's take that perspective. I think what people are talking about right now is an innovation in AI called large language models. And is that real or not? I think that's real. I think we talk about companies before large language models and what they need to do after large language models. And we see companies that are adopting large language models from the seed stage to growth stage to public companies. Brian Chesky was here with you talking about their problems that they're trying to solve with large language models, and they want to do a matching. They want to do better matching, not better search. There are just many, many problems and ideas that can be solved for small companies, for large companies, and for innovators that are going to create companies in the space. So I think it's a real trend. Now, that doesn't really answer your question on whether it's a bubble or not. It could be both, as Eileen just said, which is, you know, there's going to be a lot of hype around some of these things. But back to the internet bubble, you can have a situation where the index loses 90%, and yet there are great companies that come out of it.
Yeah.
Like,
Are at the seed stage, are startups going to survive or succeed in the age of AI? You know, there's a lot of talk that like the incumbents already have so much power.
They do have a lot of, I mean, it takes a lot of compute resources, and that's why we're seeing, it's kind of a tale of two cities right now, I think not just at seed, but at probably every stage, that a lot of the companies that are AI native and also have teams that are pedigreed. My joke is like, you know, 3 guys who interned at OpenAI last summer raised a $50 million seed round. Like, people who have some credibility in the space are raising very large rounds at pretty high valuations. A lot of other software companies are struggling to raise. I think there's going to be a lot of great companies built, both that are not kind of with these pedigreed AI founders and without. But yeah, there's definitely, that space is commanding pretty premium valuations right now.
Now, obviously, Aileen, you have personally been such a champion of diversity in the industry, or the co-founders of AllRaise. And I'm curious if, in the midst of all of this volatility and
With a great
economic
ally. Partner, yep.
Ally, thank you. Restructuring, are you worried that some of the progress that we've made on diversity is going to take a back seat, or that we are going to regress?
Well, we definitely have to be wary. When you look at past downturns, I think our industry is doing a really good job of building more sensitivity, trying to take bias out of processes, starting to track and measure the diversity and the composition of their cultures and teams. And so they've made changes in the past couple years. And so we cannot go back to the way it was. I think more founders realize that they have a lot of influence on who they hire, and a lot of VCs on who's on the board, who's on the management team, who's on the cap table. And as long as we continue to push for that and be committed to it, I think we can continue to make progress in our industry, but we cannot let up. There was a UN study that just came out this week that showed that like 9 out of 10 people in the world are biased against women. It's like, that's pretty bad. I think 1/4 of the people surveyed said it's okay to beat your wife. Like, there's a lot of stuff we can fix. And the tech industry is so influential and so consequential that I think we have an incredible role to play.
All right, so we've heard your taglines: tug of war, take Ozempic, eat ramen. Last quick question: how far out is the next era of good times?
Oh, far out. It's good times now. This is fun, guys. You get to solve hard problems.
Yes.
Let me just tell you that if you don't want to solve hard problems, you should get out of business in general. And that's just true, because if you want to build an enduring company, you will face hard times at some point in your career. If you want a long career in business, if you want to build an enduring company, just focus on solving hard, valuable problems and be patient.
Let's keep the good times rolling.
That's a great ending.
All right, Aileen Lee, Alfred Lin, thank you both so much.
Thanks for having us.
And thank you for my prop. All right, now we are going to be closing the day with 2 women that I'm really excited to speak with. The CEO and founder of Pendulum Therapeutics, which is actually a Sequoia-backed company, Dr. Colleen Cutliff, and the woman who needs no introduction, Halle Berry, who is the Chief Communications Officer at Pendulum, and my colleague, Brad Stone. Let's welcome them to the stage.
All right. What a wonderful way to end our day. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
for
you
being here.
for having
and
us.
Halle, you made a Herculean effort to get here on time from Cannes Lions.
I did. It's a long flight, and I lost my luggage, so.
Oh no.
I planned on wearing something that looked more like what Colleen has on.
Well, if that's what you look like on the plane, I think you're doing pretty well.
And frankly, in San Francisco, you fit right in.
Good, okay, thank you.
When you said you lost your luggage, though, I was imagining what I travel in. I was like, so she's going to be in sweatpants and a tank top? But you travel much nicer than...
Well, today I did, thank you.
Well, I was telling you backstage, for me, probiotics, the aisle in my local Whole Foods is immensely confusing. The products are all almost indistinguishable. A slight sense that digestive chaos might result from any one of them. But here you guys are closing a tech conference. So what is different about Pendulum?
Yeah, I think if you've ever been in a grocery store and stood in the aisle and been confused by all the different probiotics, you're not alone, and also you're right. They are all more or less the same. If you start reading labels, you'll see that it's the same kind of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium strains. There hasn't been a new ingredient introduced in over 50 years in the probiotics industry. And so it's ripe for disruption. And the gut microbiome, which is premised in DNA sequencing and biochemical assays to understand how do you metabolically map the microbiome and then understand what impact that has on human health, becomes a sequencing and a tech problem and an engineering problem applied into a field of probiotics where there hasn't been a new ingredient. And so it really, for us, has been awesome to be able to innovate in the field and to bring products that have true efficacy that's measurable to the world.
And from my point of view, they have this one probiotic called Akkermansia. And what impressed me most about Pendulum in the beginning is they're the only company, Colleen, has been able to figure out how to grow this one probiotic. And it's really important. It's one that, as we age, we lose, right? And so for women smack dab in the middle of menopause, It's a really good thing. And I think that is one very important factor that sets Pendulum out from all of the other. And the other companies have tried and tried and tried, and Colleen has been the only one to be able to do that.
Halle, talk to us a little bit about your own health journey and what led you to Pendulum in particular when, as Brad said, like the aisle is overwhelming.
Well, first of all, I got diagnosed with diabetes when I was 19 years old. And so I was on 36 units of insulin, and I was young, and I was trying to understand, what that meant for my life. And being young in the film industry and trying to take insulin shots all day long and eat the right foods when I had to eat the right foods really was a problem. So I ended up meeting this Eastern medicine doctor, and he took me down this Ayurvedic path. And so he would send me roots and herbs and vitamins to boil up and make all these potions, right? So I eventually, without the help of my Western medicine doctor, weaned myself off insulin. So I have always been a believer in helping my body jumpstart itself to work properly and putting, the proper nutrients through food in my body, realizing that I could force it to work in a more optimal way. So I had a friend, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and a friend of mine from Cleveland called me up and said, you have to try this new probiotic. Pendulum is backed by the Mayo and the Cleveland Clinic. So she said, you should try this. I know you're always looking for ways to keep your A1C down and to stay healthy. You should give it a try. And I did, and I saw results pretty quickly. My A1C went down, my energy levels went up, it helped with brain fog, being in menopause, that was really good for me. I got better sleep. I started to see real, tangible results. And I had tried other probiotics since I was 19, 20 years old, and nothing really moved my needle like this product moved my needle. And that's when I reached out to the company and I said, I want to understand more about this. Who is this Colleen Cutler? I want to know how this came about. And she was so, graciously, she entertained all of my questions and all of my calls. And finally, I said, how can I be a part of this? How can I be a part of helping everybody else learn what I learned? It was like a eureka moment for me when I really found a product that actually worked.
Almost coincidentally, the weight loss drug Ozempic was coming up in your previous panel, almost as a metaphor for startups slimming down. But I made me curious, are there chemical similarities in the products that Pendulum is selling? And how do you guys feel about these weight loss drugs that are suddenly very fashionable in Silicon Valley, I would presume in Hollywood as well?
Yes, it's pervasive. I've always been, I'm not going to say what's right or wrong or, everybody has to make this choice for themselves, but I've always been sort of the natural holistic route. I do it with diet control as a lifestyle and exercise. I think that's been really helpful in my life in managing my diabetes, so that's how I go about it.
Colleen, you're a biochemist. I think a lot of people look at these supplements, probiotics, and think of it as this woo-woo thing. Even Western doctors won't prescribe it, or some doctors have told me, don't take that stuff. Talk to us about the real science behind it.
Yeah, I think that I actually tend to agree with that. I think I don't take any other probiotics, and I think there's a fair amount of it that you don't actually know what's in the bottle. There have been a lot of studies to come out showing that what's on the label is not the same as what's in the bottle. It's not regulated the way drugs are, and so it enables a lot of people to just kind of come in, be a flash in the pan, and take market share. So the science underlying it, and I can bring it back to the GLP-1s, is that actually Pendulum Glucose Control, our flagship product, was intended to help the body naturally produce GLP-1. That's actually what it does. And so your body, when you eat food that has sugar in it, which is basically everything, first gets digested in your gut microbiome. And your gut microbiome responds to that food by stimulating GLP-1. The GLP-1 is produced by the gut microbiome. And so what these drugs are trying to do is to mimic that GLP-1, and Pendulum Glucose Control was trying to give you back these microbes that help you metabolize food to naturally stimulate GLP-1. And we had all these reports of people saying, well, I've been losing weight, my appetite's been going down. 70% of our customers take the product because they don't have sugar cravings and food cravings. And this is all really the product of GLP-1. And so all of these things are tied together. And whether it's a pharmaceutical drug versus a natural product, I think it is a super important pathway when we think about metabolism.
And tell us where you're taking this. So, not only what's in the pipeline, but what is the scope of the ambition? And now that you have Halle on board, and maybe are distinguishing yourselves from the crowded probiotics aisle, what is the ambition of the company?
Well, I think the microbiome, we're now learning, is linked to all kinds of different systems in the body. And I'll just say this about meeting Halle, because as you might imagine, it can be intimidating to meet somebody like Halle. And I feel like we hit it off from the first time that we talked, and eventually got comfortable enough where she said, Colleen, you've really created a product that works, but nobody knows who you are, and nobody's ever heard of Pendulum. I know how to make
change the packaging.
And you gotta change the packaging. This just looks like a bottle of medicine. How do we create a package that the innovation on the outside matches the inside, but really, how can I help you create a brand and create awareness? And I think that's kind of the power duo that we've got here. And so when we think about going out and really capitalizing on the gut microbiome, it goes way beyond what you think about today, which is GI distress, into metabolic health, which is what our first products are on. We know that the gut-brain axis is really important. Akkermansia actually produces GABA, which is known to reduce stress and anxiety. And we know that there are kind of your typical neurodegenerative diseases that you can start to go after with the gut. And so we're super excited to keep learning and exploring the science.
Halle, you are, of course, Halle Berry. How did you decide you wanted a second act, and how much will this be your second act?
Oh, this will very much be my second act. I feel like Colleen said, I feel it's incumbent upon me to use any, influence that I have over everyday people for good. And because I used this product for over a year before I really asked her to really get involved. Well, I saw signs pretty early. I thought, no, let me ride this out. Let me see what the effects will be. And so I really took it very seriously, and I wouldn't be sitting here wanting to help her and, align with her if I really didn't feel like this was something that really actually worked for me in a big way. And my job now is to just let all of you know. And since I'm at a summit, I'm going to say this: if there's anybody out here who wants to get involved, let us know, because I do think that this is a revolutionary product, and I do think very soon this is going to be the leader. It's going to emerge as the leader of the pack in probiotics.
You've also dropped the M word a couple times, which is menopause. And there are these taboo, there are these women's health topics that are taboo, that people don't talk about. So I appreciate that you are talking about these things, but should we be lifting the veil on more of these issues?
Yes, that's also a lane I'm going down, also in this active life, because we have to sort of, we have to get rid of these taboos. Women have been suffering since the beginning of time. 1 million women a year go into menopause. $1.8 billion is lost in wages because women can't go to work. So it's like, this is a real issue, And I'll say this too, I love every man in this room, but if men suffered from menopause, this would have been figured out a long time ago. And it's true. So I just ask my brothers to support us as we go through this process, and as women become more comfortable and we take the shame out of it. We are blessed to make it to the menopausal years, right? And we are our best selves as women. We're stronger, we're smarter, we've lived life, we've raised our children, we now have money to spend, we're feeling good. It's our time to really put some energy and some resources behind this issue and help us figure out ways that we can actually not just survive this time, but thrive. And Pendulum is a really good product to start you on that journey.
Another taboo you've been vocal about in the past is mental health. Is there a link between taking care of yourself in this kind of product and mental health?
Yeah, I think so. I think, when your gut is well, then everything about you is well. So it all starts here in your gut, for sure.
Colleen, it's not often we talk to a therapeutics company that's backed by Sequoia. And so and Alfred actually told me he's a huge fan. He takes a lot of supplements. I know Roloff, both who's on your board, does as well. What does Sequoia bring to the table that another investor might not, given the Silicon Valley connection?
Well, I think when we first started, we were all about the technology. And something that's really cool is that before I started this company, I worked at Pacific Biosciences, which is a DNA sequencing company. And DNA sequencing technologies really were born, in Silicon Valley. And so that's the technology that creates all the massive amount of data that we use to identify what are the next targets to go after. And so when we first started working with Sequoia, it really was, how do you bring the latest technologies and big data together with science and try to crack that nut? How do you bring these two things together? And then I would say there are a lot of venture capital firms that say that they're founder friendly, but Sequoia is incredibly founder friendly. They create all of the tools and the infrastructure and the learning lessons to help all of us succeed. And they kind of have this phrase, the tribal knowledge, all the things that they've learned, and many startups go through sort of the same trials and tribulations, and how can they help us avoid the potholes as we're going down these new roads. And it's been an amazing partnership. And just their belief and how many of them are even on the products and sharing back their stories. I couldn't imagine better partners in building this.
This is not a regulated space, right? The FDA treats this as a nutritional supplement or even a food ingredient. Should it be regulated? Do both of you have conviction about that? And can you change the government's view on probiotics?
Well, actually, Pendulum glucose control is not a supplement. It's on a different path, which is called medical food, which is kind of between drug and supplement. So the reason we can say this is for people with type 2 diabetes and helps lower A1C and blood glucose spikes is because it is in a slightly different regulated space than the completely unregulated supplement.
But does it have FDA approval?
It's not a drug, so it's not an FDA-approved drug. But I think that we'd all love to have more regulation in the space, and especially as this grows, I do think it's the responsibility of the industry to make sure that people aren't being fooled.
Yeah, because my slogan is all probiotics are not created equal, and I've tried most of them.
Are regulators receptive to these messages? Can you use your influence to go and make a difference in how regulators look at this and maybe clean up the industry a little bit?
They're already making movements towards that, and it starts with standardizing how things are reported on the label. And so there have already been new laws put into place around, how do you measure what you're putting on the label, and how do you make sure that there's kind of truth in the bottle. And so I think, I don't know, are you up for taking on the U.S. government?
I'm always good for a good fight.
Well, you said you've tried everything, right?
Yes.
There's a lot
I've tried many, yes.
chaos and
Yes.
misinformation in this.
Yes, so yeah. The answer would be yes. I'm up for a good fight always.
What is the next frontier in metabolic health? Like, I feel like we're kind of at a moment where we're having a breakthrough. Where do you see this going? What kind of research are you doing in terms of new products to help blow the doors open?
I think metabolic health is going to continue to grow in our knowledge and products that surround it, because essentially our ability to metabolize sugar is the #1 signal for how well we're aging, how healthy we are. And so when you can actually metabolize your sugars better, it's not just that your A1C goes down, it's that you have better energy, reduced brain fog, better workouts, some of these symptoms of menopause will start to be diminished. And so it's actually a fundamental core function of your body to metabolize sugar. And as we age, we lose things in our gut that help us metabolize these foods. And so as we start to figure out how do you improve metabolic health, we are all going to get back some of those functions that right now I think a lot of people sort of shrug and say, well, that's just part of aging. We just have to deal with it. But we don't.
I kind of want to hear your routines, like your dietary / supplement / exercise / be in better health routines. Halle, let's start with you.
Mine, well,
don't start with her. I'm going to look like a jerk.
All right. Halle, you go first.
Donuts and bourbon.
Seriously, right? I mean, you guys are thinking about this every day, so I'm curious. I want to learn.
Well, I have always managed my diabetes with my food and, and exercise, so that's a big part of what I do. I'm probably the most boring eater on the planet. I'm really just for a good protein and some, low-carb veggies that if I have that, sounds really boring, but I'm somebody that actually, eats to live. I don't live to eat, so it's not that important to me. I'm not a foodie, so it's eating that way. It's having, my exercise routine, which is always really important.
What's your exercise routine?
Well, it depends on, because of what I do, sometimes I'm playing a role where I have to lose weight. I just did a movie where I had to look emaciated like I was starving, so that's one way to sort of stay healthy while I do that. before that, I played an MMA fighter, so I had to beef up. So it all depends on what I'm doing in my work life as to what my workouts sort of look like. But the food always stays the same. My pendulum always stays the same. And I take, a few other supplements. I make sure I have my vitamin D. I take, fish oils and like other things like that to sort of supplement my pendulum. But it's always, my pendulum is with me always.
What about, the meditation / yoga / tech routine? I mean, are you a like take tech out of my day kind of person, or?
I am, but it's not to take it out of my day. That's not really my thought. My thought is more to connect to myself, because I'm also a big believer that we manifest, our realities. And so sometimes I have to go deep in, just connecting with myself and putting out in the universe that which, what I'm wanting. I'm a big believer in that too.
All right, Colleen, your turn.
She just does bourbon and donuts, like she said.
I know you didn't have to bulk up to be an MMA fighter, but
I don't eat to live, I live to eat. I love to eat. That's why we created a product. First thing I was like, how do we help this metabolism problem? So, no, I eat terribly, and then I take my glucose control. I also take my glucose control religiously, but for a different reason, to enable all the bad behaviors. I do exercise pretty religiously, because I think that that's an important part. For me, that's really a mental health thing. But no, I'm a terrible, I grew up in the South. I love fried foods and sweet things.
Hence the bourbon.
And bourbon, yeah. Go ahead.
Halle, now that you're keynoting at tech conferences and advising a venture capital-backed startup, is this the beginning of something? Are you looking for other similar opportunities related to things that you're passionate about?
Absolutely. No, just pendulum.
No.
Sit.
No. No.
She'll be available for pitches after the conference.
What's going on, Brad? No. She'll kill me.
No, but I will say this. Yeah, this is the second half of at 56 years old, I've really realized I'm kind of done being the dancing bear. And so I really want to have a second act that's as meaningful as my first act. I hope so.
And actually, I think in your career, you've had to be incredibly entrepreneurial. There's a lot of skills you've had to develop that apply directly to being in a startup.
Yeah, and that's a really, I won't say many jobs are stressful, but as a movie actor, after every movie, you're unemployed again. So you're constantly, starting a new venture, if you will, or finding work, or finding a way to also build your career so that after 30 years, you can still, be relevant in your career. So that takes, I think, entrepreneurial spirit for sure.
All right, so we'll end with this. I think, some people in the audience might be hearing this for the first time. If they're intrigued, what should they do first? How do they go out there and start this journey?
Well, I think good gut health sort of starts with getting educated first. So we have a lot of educational materials on our website, pendulumlife.com, but there's also, it's becoming mainstream enough that you can go to the Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic websites and you can learn about gut health. And I think what's really important is that people not take a product because they think it's doing something for them. We always tell people, you will have you will feel a difference. And if you don't feel a difference, don't just do the thing. So I think that's an important thing. What are you trying to solve? What are you expecting to see? And then you go into this journey figuring out you're optimizing for those metrics.
But I would say if you're struggling at all with type 2 diabetes in any way, your A1C is too high, glucose control is the product for you. If you are just not really having a problem with sugar, but you just want to have better metabolism, weight control, sleep better, then I would say Metabolic Daily would be, I think, the way to start.
Halle Berry, Dr. Colleen Cutliff, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
We're going to say goodbye to everyone. Thank you. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, we're done. Thank you all for joining us at the Bloomberg Tech Summit. And thanks to all the speakers and the moderators for a great day.
There's some light bites on the rooftop, I believe.
But wait, let me thank our presenting sponsors, Chrome Enterprise and Autonomous, and our marketing sponsors, SF City and the National Venture Capital Association, who made this event possible.
And we do have a dinner program moving from defense to offense, keeping your organization safe on the web. Proudly sponsored by Chrome Enterprise. That starts at 6 o'clock, and the room is right off the main stairway to the left. I don't know which, it's out there.
And rewatch any part of today's summit because you missed it or just want to watch it again.
Or you just want to see Palmer Luckey all over again.
BloombergLive.com and click on the Bloomberg Tech Summit icon to view it on demand.
Yes.
Thank you, and
Thank
please
you
join
all.
us.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
The bar is open.